Good evening. Welcome to the continuation of the Tuesday, December 18th, 2012 Elmhurst Board of Education meeting and public hearing for the adoption of the 2012 Certificate of Levy. The board has been in closed session since 5:30 this evening to discuss student discipline, negotiations, employment of employee, closed session minutes, and approval of closed session minutes. So with that, we have 7 board members present, none absent, and the next on our agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now I'm going to turn the meeting over for just a minute to our superintendent, Mr. Purnell.
Yes, as we all know, there was a great national tragedy that happened in our country in the state of Connecticut on Friday. And I just want to take a few minutes to talk just a little bit about what the aftermath of that has been and what we're doing in Elmhurst 205 to make sure we are addressing security issues throughout the school. I sent a memo out on Friday and again today from Talk 205 explaining that we are reviewing all of our security procedures across the district. We have done a couple of things to tighten up security. As of Monday, I think you will find as you hit the entrances to our building that it's not just enough to buzz. Now you may be quizzed on your purpose and your identification to get into the schools. Obviously, if we know you, we will be buzzing people in, but we're going to be take more precautions than we have in the past. I also want to thank the Elmhurst Police Department, who has had their patrol officers in front of our buildings both before school and after school this week and have been doing drive-bys at all of our school. That's a great manpower issue for them, but I really appreciate the security and sense of safety that it provides to our students and our staff in doing that. We are not going to end here. We will continue to review all of our safety and security procedures. We have a standing district security and safety committee that meets periodically that reviews all of our safety and security protocols. That committee obviously will be looking specifically at some of the issues that arose from this incident and how we can again do some things better. We also will be looking at our facilities in general for long term. The unfortunate thing is it is such a random act, and it is very, very difficult to plan on any kind of prevention for something like that. And I know I want to reach out to our parents because being a parent, I know how scary and upsetting this can be when you have a child in school that you watch leave your house every day and come into our schools and hope that we are doing everything we can to keep your child safe. Let me assure you that we are. And the people in Connecticut, the teachers and the principal who sacrifice their lives for those children, they are great heroes. But I know, being among educators for most of my adult life, and just knowing how dedicated they are, it would not be unusual for anybody on this staff, anybody that I know in education, who wouldn't run toward that gunfire rather than away to protect their children. And so I want to spend a moment of silence just to recognize them and the children who were lost in Connecticut with our thoughts and prayers. Thank you. We are going to move on with the agenda, but we're going to adjust the agenda a little bit. We have some students here this evening, and we know they always are. It's finals week, and there's a lot going on, and we want to get them in and out so they don't have an excuse they didn't have enough time for homework. So we are going to move on to College Board Advanced Placement National Scholars. And Mr. Covino, I believe, is going to start the honors.
If I could, I would like to have all the students who are being recognized please come up and stand with me. I think there are a couple of us here. Or one. Stand right here. Thank you. The College Board recognizes excellence in student achievement in a number of ways. The most straightforward and well-known way is by certifying a student's knowledge or ability with a score of 3, 4, or 5 on any of the 33 different AP exams in the spring of each school year. The students we are honoring tonight have been recognized by one of the least well-known but most prestigious awards the College Board provides students for their academic achievement. It is the least well-known not because it is irrelevant or haphazardly awarded, but because the standards for receiving this distinction are so high that it is not very commonly discussed, and even more rarely bestowed on so many students from a single district. In fact, this year we have 3 times the number that we had last year. The distinction of National Advanced Placement Scholar is made for students earning an average grade or score of 4 or higher on all exams taken, and also for students who score a 4 or higher on a minimum of 8 exams taken. For some perspective, consider that last year over 2 million students took AP exams in the United States and over 3 million took them worldwide. National AP scholars represent the top 1% of all advanced placement test takers. While impressive, these numbers are a bit sterile and do not allow us to see the personality of the student and students we are honoring. Here are just a few of the comments made by the AP teachers of the students we're honoring tonight. I'll go through all of them because they're all worth saying. Though, Hari, actually, you are the last one, so that's going to work out real well. Okay. Chloe Williams took 8 tests and received 5s on 4 of them. 5 is the highest award, usually awarded to somewhere between the top 15 and 20% of all students taking the test in the nation. Her teacher said she is very bright, supportive, and a great class participant. She loves to discover the truth through her studies, a hard worker who asks great questions that makes learning look simple. Georgy Govidarov took 10 tests and received 5s on 4 of them. His teacher said, "I believe the strongest attribute any scholar can have is humility." Georgie embodies this principle in how he approaches learning. He is always unassuming and ready to learn, which is the reason why he does so well in class. Even though he knows he's a good writer, he never lets that become an excuse for complacency. For he also knows that he can continually grow and learn, which is simply what he does. Tessa Kroll took 8 tests and received 5s on all of them. Tessa is one of the best writers I've ever met, says her English teacher. I don't just mean amongst students. Her natural ear for cadence, the musicality of her writing is unparalleled as form meets function in the creation of meaning and truth. Francisco Bertucci took 8 tests, got 5s on 5 of them. His teachers say, "I'm always impressed when a student can balance the rigors of the classroom with the demands of athletics and extracurriculars. Francisco is this type of student. He is one whose achievement is matched only by his unwillingness to settle for the mundane or ordinary." Kira Tebby took 8 tests, received 5s on 6 of them. Kira has a very analytical mind broadened by a wide variety of interests and specialties. Kira's ability to make connections and to draw sophisticated conclusions sets her apart from others, from her peers, and also endears her to them at the same time. Joseph Gaudo took 9 tests, 5s on 6 of them. Joseph is energetic and happy. He's a humble, kind student who makes every classroom a better place to learn. Ushasi Naha took 11 tests, or will by the end of her career. She's actually the only one still at York at this point in time. All the rest are graduated, and I believe back on break, some of them anyway, from college. Ms. Naha is going to take 11 tests. She's already received 5s on 6 of them. She is very hardworking, attentive, friendly, and kind. I'm amazed at her natural curiosity for learning. She devours it, feasting off of new knowledge and asking questions that always go beyond the otherwise, or at least in comparison, simple task at hand. She is relentless in that pursuit, and that's pretty cool. Sean Connolly took 8 tests, received 5s on 7 of them. His teacher said what distinguishes Sean as a student is his tireless work ethic, as he not only understands abstract concepts, but pays attention to every single minute detail. He revises not for the grade, but simply out of a pursuit for perfection. Miriam Mirza took 10 tests, received 5s on 8 of them. Not only is she very hardworking, says her teacher, is very smart, sweet, and friendly, she is driven to know the material for the sake of knowing it. She approaches learning straight ahead, like a bull, unabashed, but also introspective. Jacob Ruprecht took 11 tests, got 5s on 9 of them. Every class needs a Jacob Ruprecht to instill a community of learners. And in a world that is constantly trying to create learning through competition, as if to learn you need to step on others, Jacob proved that the collective is even more powerful than the individual. Ryan McDonough took 10 tests, received 5s on all 10 of them. I feel like I should give part of my salary to Ryan, says one of his teachers, because I used his work, with his permission, as samples for the class repeatedly. His work sets such high standards that push his colleagues far beyond what they initially expected they could do. After reading his work aloud, again with his permission, I would hear murmurs in my class of wow, and then eventually, after initial inhibitions died down, they'd shyly ask, how can I do that? And then finally, Hari Sridhar, who, very notably, took 15 tests and received 5s on all 15 tests. His teachers collectively said, Hari has this amazing ability to find patterns amongst different disciplines. Most students see math as math or English as English, separate subjects that rarely intersect. Yet Hari would love to talk about scientific principles and how they also relate metaphorically to a text, or the power of Spanish novels as he connects them to our texts in class. He saw that the lines we draw between different contents are not boundaries, but points of potential connection. Another teacher joked, when Hari raised his hand, I knew I either misspoke or I'm about to get slammed with a question I can't answer. He is easily one of the sharpest scientific minds to pass through York Community High School. The administration and faculty at York thank these students for their hard work, their perseverance, and most of all for their academic leadership.
Wait a little bit
Stay
longer.
here,
Sorry. Through AP classes, our students learn to think critically, they construct solid arguments, and see many sides of an issue. These are skills that prepare them for college and beyond. It's also a chance for our high school students to take college coursework during their high school years when there are many supports in place to help them through this rigorous work. So for those reasons and many more, advanced placement participation rate is very important to us. It's one of our key district performance indicators, and the team here is looking very closely at those numbers. So I'll go ahead and read the proclamation. It's a little bit long. Whereas the College Board's Advanced Placement Program provides motivated and academically prepared students with the opportunity to take rigorous college-level courses while still in high school and to earn college credit, advanced placement, or both for successful performance on the AP exams, and whereas 670 York High School students took a total of 1,239 advanced placement tests in May of 2012, with 89.7% of those tests resulting in a score of 3 or above on a 5-point scale, providing 605 students with the equivalent of college credit while in high school. And whereas 178
Members of the class of 2012 and 2013 were named AP Scholars at 4 levels, including Scholar, Scholar with Honor, Scholar with Distinction, and whereas top recognition was awarded to 12 students in the 4th and highest level, National Advanced Placement Scholar category, which is granted to students who receive an average score of at least 4 or higher on a 5-point scale on all AP exams taken, and scores of 4 or higher on 8 or more of those exams. And whereas the following York class of 2012 graduates earned the distinction of National Advanced Placement Scholars. Francesco Bertucci took 8 exams. Sean Connolly, I'll just read the names. Joseph Gaudio, Georgie Govidorov, Tessa Kroll, Ryan McDonough, Miriam Mirza, Jacob Ruprecht, Hari Sridhar, Kira Tebby, Chloe Williams, and Hushashi Naha, class of 2013, took 11 AP exams and scored 5 on 6 tests. And whereas this accomplishment brings pride and prestige to York Community High School and to District 205 and to the community. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Education and Administration of Elmhurst Community Unit School District 205 express congratulations to these former and current students for their outstanding academic accomplishments. Thank you.
Kind of related to this, I wanted to announce today that just about 2 or 3 weeks ago, we received communication from the AP College Board, and it announced that Elmhurst Community Schools, for the 3rd year in a row, has made the AP College Board Honor Roll for outstanding achievement on advanced placement and improvement in advanced placement students who actually take the test and the scores they receive. This award has only been awarded by the AP College Board for 3 years, and York High School Elmhurst has been recognized all 3 years for this award. Just to put this in perspective, when this started in 2010, we had 886 tests that were taken on the AP level, and that by 424 students. This year, we had 1,239 tests taken and 670 students who participate in AP classes. That is doubling the number of students who are taking advanced placement classes. And when it comes to our goal of college readiness for all of our students, I think this is a great indicator of what we're doing and what students are, how students are responding to really be ready for college, because AP is a great way to understand what the college experience will be like, and really to have that kind of increase in student participation and to increase our scores at the same time is a really outstanding achievement. So for all the staff at Elmhurst 205, the students who are working very hard, I want to congratulate them. Just to show you and impress the board of how clever your superintendent is, I came up here before the board meeting and I decided I was going to post the posters that we receive from the AP College Board. And they're in the room right now, but you can't see them because I put them behind the screen. I wonder, David and Malia, could you just lift up the screen for a minute just so they can get a glimpse? Can you rate? No, just pick it up. Just, it doesn't have to be long. Yeah. That would be great. Anyway, there it is, and when we put the screen up, you can actually see those posters, so I hope you're impressed. Our next award, it has to do with 2 of our schools that received national blue ribbons this year, and had the privilege of going to Washington, D.C. as a guest of the president and be one of very few across the country that were named as national blue ribbon schools. So if I could have Kathleen Tomei and John Glimko come up. I guess it's just that, but I'll do a quick stick. let me just say as they're coming up, this is a nationally recognized program that recognizes the outstanding schools across the country. This past year, only 269 schools were recognized by the Department of Education, by Arnie Duncan, as national Blue Ribbon schools. We had 2 schools in our district, Lincoln Elementary and Bryan, who were selected as exemplary, high-performing Blue Ribbon excellent winners. There were 21 Illinois schools honored, of which there were 13, of which 2 came from Elmhurst. It is just an outstanding achievement by all of the faculty, the students, everyone involved in those 2 schools. But I think it also reflects on Elmhurst as a total school district, because as well as schools do, it is the culture and the belief that all kids can achieve that certain schools rise up to this award. And so not only are we honoring, I think, the 2 schools this evening, but I think all of the schools in Elmhurst and the high expectations that the community holds for us, that staff hold for themselves, and work very hard, and very dedicated individuals who make sure that the very best are being done for our children. And I think that's what this award says. So I personally want to congratulate the 2 schools, John and Kathleen, for being the leaders of those buildings and having part in that Washington, D.C. trip and being recognized as a Blue Ribbon school. Congratulations. And I think Jim Collins says.
Just to add what Mr. Pernot said, to everybody in the audience, if I could encourage you to go home and recommend to your friends and other community members that they just watch the first 25 minutes of this meeting. Because I think that the 2 things that we're honoring here tonight, the AP Scholars, the Blue Ribbon schools, are a culmination of the support that our community has for education. And I think it's clear that we're making good use of the taxpayers' resources in our schools to achieve the level that we have that's exemplified tonight. And again, to reiterate what Mr. Pernot said, in the Blue Ribbon schools, it's quite an honor that in Illinois there are 13 public schools that received a Blue Ribbon, and Elmhurst has 2 of those 13. So with that, let me read the proclamation. Whereas on November 12th and 13th, 2012 in Washington, D.C., the United States Department of Education and the U.S. Secretary of Education, Arnie Duncan, recognized 269 schools as 2012 National Blue Ribbon schools. And whereas the Blue Ribbon Award honors public and private elementary, middle, and high schools where students perform at very high levels or where significant improvements are made in students' level of achievement. And whereas Secretary Duncan noted, schools honored with the National Blue Ribbon Schools Award are committed to accelerating student achievement and preparing students for success in college and careers. Their work reflects the conviction that every child has promise and that education is the surest pathway to a strong and secure future. And whereas Bryan Middle School and Lincoln Elementary School were 2 of the 21 Illinois schools, of which only 13 were public, named among the 219 public and 50 private schools from across the country that were honored as exemplary, high-performing schools. And whereas Bryan Middle School Principal John Glimko, along with faculty member Kurt Baumeister, and Lincoln Elementary School Principal Kathleen Tomei, along with faculty member Barbara Clancy, accepted the award on behalf of the entire staff, students, and parents. And whereas these schools are to be congratulated for their efforts as this accomplishment brings pride and prestige to Bryan and Lincoln schools, to District 205, and to the Elmhurst community as a whole. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Education and Administration of Elmhurst Community Unit School District 205 express deep appreciation and congratulations to those schools for their outstanding achievement.
I just
like to recognize some of our staff members that are here. Oh, yeah, press the button. I'd like to recognize.
Let it go, and now I can work it. Okay? Dave, give the technology lesson. I appreciate that. Thank you. But I would like to recognize, we have some staff members here with us. My assistant principal that works with me, Melissa Couch. Say hi, Melissa. And two of our committee members, Diane Danilchek and Drew McGuire, who worked with us. Also, Elmhurst Products, too, as well. Without you, and all your support, we wouldn't have that. Thank you so much. You know, I don't have a long speech prepared, lucky for all of you. But I do want to thank all of you for this recognition for our schools. And as Jim has said, as well as Mr. Pernod, that this reflects the Elmhurst community so well. It's an outstanding educational community filled with support from our parents, great students. It's a joy to work with each and every day, and a wonderful staff and supportive board to help us do what we need to do. So I thank you on behalf of all of them, and thank you for this honor.
See, I did that because those of you who know me know that I like to have the last word. So if I have a number of staff members and parents, so if you would please join me up here. This is something that we've all earned. So on behalf of the students, staff, parents, and community of Lincoln Elementary, I want to thank you for honoring us this evening. Come on. Lincoln is not about one person, one method, or one goal. We are a collective group working to support the academic and social-emotional growth of our students. We are a family. We call our students our kids, no matter our role at Lincoln. We work together to ensure that each child is encouraged and supported in reaching his or her individual goals. We know that all students will reach the finish line. Some may run, others may crawl, and some prefer to hop backwards. No matter the needs of the child, we work together for our kids. The blue ribbon is one form of recognition of our efforts, but in truth, the greatest reward comes on the faces of our kids. We are honored by this blue ribbon, and thank you for supporting Lincoln and what we do for our kids. Thank you. You all got to come up here. You can't leave that early.
Oh my. You all look cold, so.
Come on. Come on. Thank you so much. That's okay. That's okay. It happens sometimes. Thanks. Thank you.
Oh, good. Let's do it. Awesome. Good job.
Thanks.
Yeah. And my kids have as a teacher.
We're going to take a short 60-second break here for anybody that wants to move on with their evening. And we'll resume in just a few seconds here with our public hearing. To continue on, the public hearing for the adoption of the 2012 Certificate of Levy. We have 7 board members present, none absent. Mr. Pernod, or would you like to give a quick overview?
Yeah, I am going to turn this portion over to Chris Welton, who will give you an overview of the adoption of the 2012 Certificate of Levy.
Good evening. We have the public hearing for the 2012 tax levy. I just want to quickly go through the timeline. Back in January 2012, the U.S. Department of Labor reported a CPI of 3.03%. This is the CPI that applies to the 2012 tax levy and tax extension. Last month, the board approved a tentative levy with estimated amounts. On December 7th, we published a legal notice in the newspaper about tonight's hearing and with our levy amounts. Tonight we hold the public hearing and the board approves the tax levy. Between tonight and Friday, I will go to DuPage County and Cook County to file the tax levies. And then in very late March or early April, we receive the final EAV tax rates and tax extension from the county. The first installment of the 2012 taxes is in June, which is the final month of fiscal year 2013. And then we receive the second installment in September. And for that reason, this levy and this extension is more directly related to budget year 2014. The property tax extension limitation law, that is also known as the tax cap. And this is designed to limit the increases in property tax extensions. And extensions is the total taxes billed for a non-home rule taxing district. This allows a taxing district to receive a limited inflationary increase in tax extensions on property. It's commonly called the tax cap, but that term can be misleading because the property tax extension limitation law does not cap an individual's property tax bill or property tax assessment. The property tax extension limitation applies to existing property, are limited to the lesser of 5% or the increase in the consumer price index, or the CPIU, for the preceding levy year. This limitation does not apply to new construction, and we'll be talking more about new construction, which allows the taxing bodies to recoup their fair share of tax revenue from that property. Debt service, bond and interest payments are outside the tax cap, and there has not been a CPI increase of 5% since the inception of the tax cap. And this shows a list of past CPIs and the current 3% over the past 10 years. We've averaged CPI has averaged 2.49. The past 5 years, it's averaged 2.28%. This chart kind of shows the effect that the tax cap has on the rates and the relationship between rates and EAV. And currently, we're in the middle illustration there where the existing EAV is decreasing, which is resulting in an increase in the tax rate. The EAV and the tax rate have an inverse relationship, which these two charts illustrate, where back from 2005 to 2007, EAV was going up, and our tax rate was going down. In the period 2008 and 2009, EAV was rather flat, and the tax rate remained flat. Now, in the last few years, with EAV going down, the tax rate goes up as the school district continues to get CPI increases. We have two unknown factors in determining the tax levy: EAV and new construction. The EAV is not as a significant factor as new construction, and we're estimating EAV to decrease by 9%. And as I showed earlier, with that decreasing EAV, the tax rates will increase. But the most critical assumption for the tax levy is new construction. And as you can see here, new construction has been decreasing. However, last year we did have the new construction of Elmhurst Memorial Hospital of $39 million. Other new property was $15 million for a total of $54 million. And this is the most critical number, and it's a number that's hard to estimate. Last month, when we did the tentative levy with estimated amounts, we were estimating new construction at 12 to 16 million. We've gotten some new information indicating that there might be additional new 28 million of new construction at Elmhurst Hospital. And that has resulted in us having to increase our levy over what we estimated last month. I want to talk a little bit about the financial condition of the school district. And let me start with fund balances. In fiscal years 2011 and 12, we've had better than expected results. Some of those we've been fortunate with health insurance and natural gas and electricity rates have been lower than expected. And the result of these better than expected results has provided adequate fund balances, which provides a little bit of cushion for the school district in avoiding short-term borrowing for our low cash flow months, which are in April and May. On the revenue side, the district receives 84% of revenues from property taxes. This revenue stream is stable. CPI increases plus new construction. We've had double-digit decreases in corporate personal property replacement taxes. Interest earnings are at historic lows. State funding has been decreasing. General state aid was prorated this year at 89% and compared to 95% last year. State reimbursement has been reduced for regular ed transportation. Early childhood and driver education state grants have also been reduced. Federal stimulus funds have dried up, and now we are projecting decreases in federal funding in the future for the IDEA grant and the title funds through sequestration. So we're projecting federal funding decrease. On the expenditure side, staffing makes up 80% of our budget. The needs of our students and our enrollment drive our staffing, and enrollment continues to increase. In providing a high-quality educational program for District 205 learners, we feel that we need to prepare students for college and career readiness. To that end, we need to invest in technology infrastructure. We are taking a measured approach in planning and preparing for the future where at some point our students will have one-to-one technology device. There's a ton of work that needs to be done on this project, but it starts with an increase in technology spending on infrastructure over the next few years. We take pride in providing a high-quality educational program for each and every child that resides within our boundaries and walks through our doors. On a per-pupil basis, we received a smaller percentage from the state and federal government each year for special education because these costs are escalating. One area that is increasing at a rate less than CPI is wage rates or salary increases for the District 205 staff. The staff and Board of Education have recognized or acknowledged the financial condition of the school district. We are very fortunate to have a staff that's helping to keep our escalating expenditures down. Last year, the teachers' salaries were frozen, and this year are at 50% of CPI with no step. Administrators were also frozen last year. This year, any administrator that was frozen for the past 2 consecutive years received a CPI increase of 1.5%. All other administrators received a 50% of CPI or a 0.75% increases. Custodians and maintenance staff receive an increase of 75% of CPI. Our PSRP or support staff received an increase of 75% of CPI. So the board and staff have agreed to wage increases of less than CPI or inflation. We are expecting a bill in the first week of January to pass that will shift the TRS costs to the local school district. The current bill starts with a 0.5% shift in the first year, next year, or $258,000. 1% in the second year, $516,000. 1.5% in the third year, $774,000, 2% in the fourth year, or $1,032,000, and these expenditure increases would continue to increase in this pattern up until the entire normal cost is shifted to the local school district. This could be approximately 8% or $4 million per year. The 2012 tax levy that we are recommending tonight will provide a tax extension that will increase in accordance with the property tax extension limitation of CPI plus new construction. Regardless of the levy amount, the district will only receive what is allowed under the property tax extension limitation law. If new construction is $16 million, the extension for cap funds will increase 3.8%, and the overall extension will be 3.96%. If the new construction is $45 million, the extension for cap funds will increase 5.25%, and the overall extension will increase by 5.28%. So even though we are levying an overall increase of 5.37%, we expect to receive less than that increase depending on the amount of new construction. Most existing taxpayers will see the CPI increase of 3% in their tax bill. The percentage beyond 3% will be derived from the new property, new construction that are added to the district's tax rolls. On an existing taxpayer with a $300,000 house, this increase would be an annual increase of $133.59. Again, the 2012 tax levy we are recommending tonight will provide a tax extension that will only increase in accordance with the property tax extension limitation of CPI plus new construction. Regardless of the levy amount, the district will only receive what is allowed under the property tax extension limitation law.
Next on our agenda is public comment regarding this specific tax levy hearing, and then we'll have some board discussion after public comment. And I want to point out there are two opportunities for public comment this evening. The public comment that we're accepting at this moment is the public comment related specifically to the public hearing for the adoption of the 2012 tax levy. After this meeting within our meeting is over, we'll have the opportunity for other public comment as it pertains to the general board meeting this evening. And I have two people down for public comment, but it might be a little confusing between our green form and our blue form which public comment that people wanted to speak at. So the two people are Gilbert Fisher and Anna Hovalka. I'm sorry for messing up your last name. Did you specifically have meetings for the levy hearing?
The levy.
Mr. Fisher, you did. And our other speaker this evening, general comments about the general meeting or the tax levy? The general meeting. Okay, perfect. So we'll save you for later. And then if I also can point out one thing, that during public comment, as you choose your words, please remember that we have students in the audience and a lot of students that also listen to the recorded meeting and watch the recorded meeting as well. So, Mr. Fisher, if you could go to the podium, press the button so the red light comes on, state your name and your address, we'd appreciate it.
Did it. Gilbert Fisher, 586 North Van Auken, Elmhurst, Illinois. A year ago, I was in here complaining about my taxes that I paid at School District 205 because they went up 12%. Within a week after my appearance here, I had no less than 3 board members contact me about my taxes. They went over my taxes with me, and they agreed that my taxes went up that high and that I'm getting all the cuts that I can on my house. But they all assured me that this year my taxes would go down. Well, this year my taxes went up hundreds of dollars again. On the one line item for District 205, my taxes went up over $118. This year, my wife and I did not have money to pay the second half of our taxes. If we don't get money or relief on our taxes, we are going to burn our house down, which is paid for in full, which we built. We can destroy it. I've already talked to the insurance company. If I want to destroy my house, I can. And we're going to leave a hole in the ground with a big sign saying that this house that's 25 years old had to be destroyed because we could not afford our taxes. I'm asking you to pass a law that anybody that does not have anything to do with School District 205 should not pay 1 penny to School District 205. There are 1,500 elderly people in Elmhurst that are being hurt by your taxes, directly by your taxes, School District 205. In my neighborhood, there are 5 empty homes, and it's growing. 2 months ago, it was 3. Now there's 5. I need money to pay my taxes, or I need tax relief so my wife and I can stay in our house. I have one other comment on something else that has nothing to do with this, but it's because my wife and I don't know. We saw on TV a state-colored legislator saying racial comments about white people. They blocked out what the racial comment against white people was. Can somebody here explain to me what word that our state senator used against white people? Do you know anything about this? Please send me a letter. Tell me what this man swore at us white people. Thank you.
I have no one else listed under public comment. If there's anyone else, all right, then let's move to board discussion. Are there any comments about the levy or this hearing from the board? Mrs. Duroni.
Just wanted to say that every year we go through this, and the tax cap forces such an interesting irony, because we as a board, in order to be the most conservative and protective of the education that we're trying to provide for our students, we as a board have to pass a levy that in fact is larger than what we expect we're going to receive, because we're only going to get, as Mr. Welton pointed out, we're only going to get what the county gives us. But if we aren't prudent and pass a larger levy than we think we're going to get, we will cripple the district for years. It snowballs if we don't get what we have coming to us, in a sense. So I'm always struck by the irony of it, that for us to be conservative, we have to pass a larger levy than we really think we're going to get. And that's my only comment. I appreciate the explanation. I thought it was excellent, thorough, and does a good job trying to explain a very complicated issue to the public, and I'll be supporting it.
Mrs. Stufen.
Mrs. Duroni, I guess I would echo those same comments, and in that vein, it puts us at a local level in a bad position when we're getting less and less of federal funding and less from the state. And we already know that, some of the cost shifts are coming to us, whether it's sequestration at the federal level, where, 8.2% less of federal funding will come to us, to the pension cost shift to the local district that Mr. Welton identified here. So I know that that's future, but to that point, we have been working under the same auspices for the last 3 years and still taking millions out of the budget. So from local taxpayers completely understand, is this the right thing to do? Is this really what we want to do? No. But at the same time, we have to be good stewards of education in Elmhurst.
Ooh.
I did have something.
Mrs. Hirsch.
Knocked the water bottle over. I apologize. I had one question, Mr. Welton. on one of the slides, you were talking about the new construction estimate that we have. And I guess I apologize, but the $28 million from Elmhurst Hospital, can you just, I apologize, it's new to me, I'm a little behind. Could you just confirm my understanding, if Elmhurst Hospital does in fact have $28 million of new construction, that would be included in our new construction number. However, those funds would be not generating any revenue for any of the taxing bodies. Those would continue to be exempt. I just want to make sure I understand the $28 million new possible construction from the hospital. That does not really assist the district. Is that accurate?
The hospital hasn't been determined to be tax exempt at this time. So we would benefit from the additional new construction at the hospital.
But yet we're setting aside reserves with the expectation that Elmhurst Hospital will be restored to its nonprofit status at some point in the relatively near future, or did something change?
It's unknown at this time, the outcome, so we did conservatively set it aside in the audit report.
Mr. McDonough.
Just to follow up, I think most lay people can follow along and say CPI is 3% and everything above that is new growth. Where would this be, excluding this Elmhurst Hospital portion that is going to be set aside for a likely refund? What would the increase in levy be without that Elmhurst Hospital portion of it?
Without the Elmhurst Hospital, I was estimating new construction to be closer to 16 million, which would result in a tax extension increase of 3.96%.
Anyone else? Mrs. Steuven?
Can I ask a clarifying question on the new construction and the 28 million addition? Are we saying we're going to be caught in the same situation where we're going to have to consider this new construction, basically pay the taxes, collect the taxes, and then when we pay them back, we're going to have to pay those taxes in addition, interest in addition to the taxes, the new revenue, the new construction?
That's the way I see it, unless the Department of Revenue determines them to be tax exempt in the next month or so. They would need to determine that in January for that to not happen again, for this tax levy and this tax extension. So we're still not sure, and we don't know the outcome, whether they will or won't be tax exempt or not. But for them not to be, for us not to get that new construction would be that they would have to determine that next month.
Otherwise, we will receive that tax collection. We will have to, as we did this previous year, put it in reserve and hold on to it, not spend it, not use it for educational purposes. And then eventually, if it's determined that the hospital is tax exempt, we would pay that back to the county, who would then reimburse the hospital with interest at that point. Yes. As it stands right now, that is what it says.
If I can make one comment, observation of my 4 years on the board, the consumer price increase, or the limit at which we can raise taxes, has been in a range, with the high being this year of 3% and the low being 2008 of 0.1%. Those 4 years averaged 1.84%. Any significant new money coming into the district has been from the new growth, the building of property, Over those 4 years, we've had to lay off 56 teachers. We've increased class sizes. We've frozen our administrator salaries for 2 of those 4 years. We froze our teacher salaries for 1 of those years. All 4 of our labor unions that, or I'm sorry, all 3 of our labor unions that represent the vast majority of the employees of this district have agreed to wage increases that are tied to inflation, in fact, to less than inflation. In the teacher's case, 1/2 of inflation, and the rest of our employees 3/4 of the rate of inflation. So wages have gone up at less than the rate of inflation. But meanwhile, every year I've been here, I've seen our ACT scores increase. And the example this evening of our AP Scholars Program, more and more kids reaching higher and higher level of academic achievement. And I think if you can say that measure government efficiency and us as a unit of government, I would say we are increasing efficiency in District 205, given our results versus the resources that we have. That's the end of my comments. Anything else? Then I will need a motion to adjourn the public hearing for the adoption of the 2012 certificate of levy and to return to our regular meeting. Mrs. Duroni.
I move we adjourn the public hearing meeting and return to our regular meeting.
The motion on the floor is to adjourn the public hearing for the adoption of the 2012 certificate of levy and return to our regular meeting. Moved by Mrs. Duroni, seconded by Mrs. Hirsch. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Motion passes. We are back into our regular meeting. Now that we're back to our regular meeting, the next item on our agenda is public comments. So please come up to the microphone, state your name, your address, and you'll have 3 minutes. And don't forget to push the bar so the red light goes on. Oh, it already is on. You're in luck.
Hi, my name is Anna Havorka. I live at 189 Hawthorne Avenue. I'm a senior at York High School. And as our nation mourns the loss of the students and families at Sandy Hook Elementary School, as stated earlier, our district has put in order new security plans. And yesterday at York, we were informed of the new security plans, and they were put in order to protect us, but in matters made things worse. For the students, we are not allowed to be in the hallways anymore or leave through exits, and we are pushed into the commons into one large group of people, which in my opinion is a bigger place with more people, and it is dangerous, considering the fact that if an intruder was to come into the school, that it would be an easier target for so many people in the same place, and our commons and cafeteria cannot hold as many people as have been shoved in there. We have seen that Sandy Hook is a safe school, and the shooter there, it couldn't have been prevented. The shooter broke into the school, and it just couldn't have been prevented. And I don't think that these new policies are helping the school or preventing anything. I think it's making people more stressed out and students more eager to rebel as they were before. I also think that the security isn't the matter at hand here. The matter at hand is that the shooter at Sandy Hook had a mental illness, and I think that the school district needs to consider the fact that there are many students in our school district that have mental illnesses and are not seen or considered. They're not. What I'm trying to say is, I know many people in my grade, let alone, that are very lonesome and shy and to me seem depressed, and those people are not talked to or just talked to on a regular basis, and I think we need to talk to the students and get their opinions, because the matter at hand is that's who is in danger if there was anything to happen. And the real concern is the mental well-being of the students. Thank you.
While it's not our policy to comment on public comment, I can assure you that we are listening carefully. Thank you very much. The next on our agenda is Superintendent's Communication. Mr. Purnell.
Yes, we're going to start this evening with a school district library grant program for this school year, and I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Johns.
Every year, the Curriculum and Instruction Department submits an application for the library per capita grant, purely at an application stage at this point. A requirement of the grant is to have the board review the school library and media program, utilizing a program called Linking for Learning, which is a set of guidelines for the operation of libraries and media centers in a district. The library grant is an entitlement grant that the district is eligible for based upon our student enrollment as of September 30th, 2012. If we were to earn this grant, we would receive approximately $5,700 for the grant, which would be used for books, audiovisual materials, and/or electronic resources. A survey was sent to the district librarians in order for them to complete the Linking for Learning process. The Linking for Learning book is downstairs in the Curriculum and Instruction office. The grant application materials are on file and can be viewed by the public.
Any questions? Hearing none.
Seeing none. We'll move on then. I'm introducing Chris Welton again, and Chris is going to do the annual audit review for the public and the board this evening.
The auditing firm and Scott Klein was at the Finance Committee meeting a few weeks ago and went through the entire comprehensive annual financial report in detail. Tonight, I'm just going to do an overview. The first thing is that last year's comprehensive annual financial report, we received the Association of School Business Officials Certificate of Excellence in Financial Reporting, and the current audit report, June 30th, 2012, has been submitted for that award also, and that award recognizes the fact that this report meets the highest standards of excellence. And if you look at it, there is a tremendous amount of detail in the back schedules. District 205 has an internal auditor that reports directly to the superintendent, Helen Perez, and she deserves a lot of credit for the extensive work she does with the auditors in helping prepare the annual financial report. She actually does a lot more than just the audit. She does a lot of initiatives with the human resources and the finance department. But this is one thing where she really steps up and does great work for the school district. This is the opinion letter, which says that the real value of the audit is that we have an independent CPA firm that comes in and reviews everything that, and the independent CPA firm reports directly to the board, and they have submitted a clean, unqualified opinion regarding our financial statements. I don't want to go into a lot of detail regarding our annual audit. This was from fiscal year 2012. This page actually summarizes, and I've got a little more detail, but in total it shows an increase in our fund balances of $3.8 $3,868,000. So this was a positive year that turned out better than expected. These are the general funds, the education fund, the operation maintenance, and working cash fund, which those three funds increased fund balance by $3.3 million. The operations and maintenance fund is the only fund that actually decreased, and that fund has from a percentage of expenditure basis, the largest fund balance of all our funds. So that was planned for in the budgeting process. And then the other funds, which they call the non-major governmental funds, transportation, IMRF, capital projects, debt service, and the fire prevention and safety, had an increase in fund balance of $524,000. And that's really all I had for this year's annual audit. Any questions?
Anything for Mr. Weld? Mr. Bloom?
Chris, in response to doing a little bit better than expected, the $3.8 million, I think we also need to note that we, in light of that, the budget that was approved for this year was a loss of almost $2 million. You're recognizing that the performance last year was better than expected and adjusting the fund balance because of that. I just want to make sure we point that out.
Anything else? If I can ask, and not to put you on the spot, answer my own question. I am fascinated every time I sit through the presentation from the auditor that of the contribution to our teachers' pensions that the Illinois income taxpayer makes. My first 3 years on the board, each year the Illinois income taxpayer contributed 23% of our teachers' salaries to the pension fund. This past year, it was our auditor said it was 26%. I just want to point that out to point out what an incredibly bad idea shifting the burden of funding teachers' pensions to the property taxpayer is from the state income taxpayer. Mrs. Stuphin will talk in a minute about, I'm sure she'll highlight, our meeting with one of our newly elected state senators, Tom Cullerton, last Friday. But he speculated that this pension shift will most likely occur sometime between the 2nd and 8th of January as the lame duck session of the Illinois legislature is in session. And in coming up with one of many plans that have currently been proposed to shift pension funding from the Illinois income taxpayer to the property taxpayer. Again, it will strain our budget. It unfortunately may translate into more teachers losing their jobs and larger class sizes for our students. Again, the rate of inflation over the last 20 years has been low, so our ability to raise property taxes is limited to fund that kind of a thing. So I'd urge everyone watching this or in the audience tonight to join me in urging our legislators and pointing out to them what a bad idea shifting the funding of the municipal and teachers' pension funds in Illinois, that what a bad idea it is to shift that to the property taxpayer. So thank you for letting me have the floor for a second. Mrs. Hirsch.
I agree with what you said. I just want to point out to the public, I think the audit report is one thing that we obviously pay close attention to, but I think one of the byproducts and the document that is created that supports the audit is the comprehensive annual financial report itself, the CAFR. It is a resource for any community member, any taxpayer. There is significant information in that document. It's over 100 pages. I know we try not to print every document that we receive, but in terms of understanding the complete financial picture for this government agency. I think it is an excellent document. It also has historical data in terms of our levy, in terms of EAV growth, in terms of our staffing, in terms of our enrollment, every component that we are affected by in our financial situation. It's not just, yes, everything is in the right category and in the right account. It actually is a very comprehensive document, which is very, very informative. And so I encourage, it's out on the website, it's out on board docs, and it's something that, although it might not be the most exciting reading that you've ever done, and I don't think it would make a great Christmas gift, but I do think in terms of transparency and understanding the financial situation of the district, that is one of the key tools that as a board member I look to as a resource throughout the year. So I encourage I'm thrilled that the availability of it, that it's online, it's available to anyone, and I think it's something that we should encourage continued education about the financial situation the district is in.
Anything else? Okay. Mr. Pernod.
Yes, Dr. Johnson is going to take the podium at this time, and he would like to talk about our district and school improvement plans. We were notified in September that there was a new process we were required to go through from the state on a district and two of our buildings, two of our schools going through it's called Rising Star School Improvement Plan. I want to congratulate and thank Dr. Johns and his curriculum staff, along with all the volunteers that he will mention in his PowerPoint. They spent significant hours under a very tight time schedule to complete what you're going to see tonight. It was quality work that was well done under a very tight timeline. And I want to thank all of the participants for being as dedicated as they are. We had some quality discussion about district improvement, about what was working, what was not working, and that is all tied to the key DPIs that the board and the administration have established. So Dr. Johns would like to give you a brief walkthrough on that process, and then later on you'll be asked to approve that district improvement plan for the state.
Thank you, Mr. Pernod. I think you encapsulated the bulk of what I wanted to express today. This is a process that was very detailed, very specific, and very systemic in its approach, and it's very wide-reaching in terms of how to improve a school district and improving a school. The two schools in the district were required to do this because AYP was not met by them 4 years in a row. This is a provision under No Child Left Behind. As you'll recall, under No Child Left Behind, there are federal accountability measures and there are state accountability measures. Following this continual improvement, school improvement, and district improvement process is part of the state procedures under No Child Left Behind. However, it is important to know our federal grants for low-income students, for class size reduction grants, and for English language learners are all contingent upon us having these improvement plans on file with the state. The process has changed considerably since the school improvement plans of even last year. Starting with the schools of greatest need in the state of Illinois has been implementing the Rising Star process, which is really the Illinois version of a much broader known process called IndyStar, which 20 states are using as their improvement driver in their states. I'm using their language. Hopefully I don't speak like this next paragraph. It's an improvement process that is a continual cycle of assessing and planning and implementing and tracking a district and a school's ability to improve. The belief is that everything will be very synchronized, very clear, and it follows a very project management-based focus that should help schools and districts improve. It's important to know it's a continual process, and we are very, very early on in the process, so there's not a whole lot to share. We've just started the first phases. It's a 2-year model of continual self-analysis, and literally we are in the very early steps of this process. The state requires that we submit what we have to this date this week. There are 5 major benefits the Rising Star claims. The first is innovation. By working in school and district level teams, it is believed that the innovation of the staff members will help come up with great ideas for improvement. The Rising Star process is very research-based, so as we go through the different factors of school and district operation, there's a lot of research that we read and have research-focused discussions and debates around those topics. The whole process, by being so integrated between schools and districts, hopefully increases the capacity of a district and enables us to have conversations about budget and timing and priorities. Although it's not the best project management system I've seen, it's certainly the most highly developed that I've seen in education, where we're able to track timelines and responsibilities and benchmarks. And finally, it really brought a lot of data into the hands of the people who are committee members to really understand where we're strong as a district and where we need to continue to grow. So certainly in terms of operational data, I would say that we had a very rich conversations. I mentioned earlier these indicators or aspects of improvement. For a district, there are 50 indicators that we will eventually have to look at to evaluate our performance as a district. Schools have 104 of these. Now, the requirement for this week is that as a district, we look at 24 of them. So give you some indication of where we're at. We don't have to take action on all 24, but we had to assess them and take action on at least a number of them. There are approximately 8 stages that we need to go through in this process when we're on stage 2. I'm not going to read off all the names, but the district Rising Star team met with us, I believe, 9 times for at least a half a day or a full day. That's an incredible amount of time. We have people who are our top professionals in the district who were willing to give up this much time during a year that I think is probably the busiest that I've seen in education in terms of evaluations and trying to get our performance levels as high as possible. So from my own perspective, I'm greatly indebted to these individuals who are able to put together a great product. Churchville, I think, met at least 6 times and had a very good conversation, and were able to accomplish quite a bit with their goals. And this is the membership of the Churchville Rising Star team. York had a very large team as well, and I think had 6 to 8 meetings in which they went through this process as well. You'll see some names were on both lists of either their school or of their district, people who've made huge sacrifices for the benefit of the district. The Churchville's goals I'll summarize because they have 9 goals, but several of the goals are able to encapsulate very tightly around leadership team operation. So many of these are sub-goals about improving the process, the methodologies that the leadership team at the school uses. Also in these goals are developing a standardized and aligned curriculum, and finally there is a school environment goal where they look at aspects of social emotional learning and the school's climate for children. Next are the York goals. The goals for York revolve around standards aligned curriculum and instruction. Also, the operation of the instructional team that looks at physical, social, emotional, and behavioral well-being of their students to make good decisions about curriculum and instruction. And finally, they added the goal of student engagement as one of their goals. As a district, we chose 4 goals. The first is that we could continue on our work of having an aligned curriculum that's aligned to state standards and best practices. Also, in line with our key performance indicators, we set goals based on subgroup achievement targets. And then the third goal on the screen is that the school board and the superintendent presents a unified vision for school improvement, which I think is at least partially exemplified by the key performance indicators. And finally, that we would put resources in place to support school staff and instructional improvement. So those are the initial goals that we're looking at this point. As we make accomplishments on the different sets of goals, new goals come on or new indicators have to be assessed. So it is truly a work in process. It is certainly the most rigorous school and district improvement process that I've been through. There is no way that it's going to be a binder that's put on a shelf. There are accountability provisions built into the software, and eventually, I should put this under next steps, eventually it is going to be loaded onto the Illinois Interactive Report Card, so it's available for everybody in the state to view and keep us accountable. It is aside from the availability on the IRC, like I said, it's a continued work in action. Our next steps are going to be to pick up the next indicators. We also have to reconcile the budgetary considerations that need to be made in order to accomplish these goals as we enter into the budget season. We have to also continue the process of assigning the task of the specific task to complete those goals and start to monitor our own success. So the thing I think I'm most excited about is there's a lot of alignment between our school and district improvement plans and our key performance indicators. That since there's a lot about alignment of curriculum, analysis of subgroup performance, and the academic, social, emotional needs of our students, I think we'll see a nice, tight coherence with our district KPIs. And that's it for our Rising Star program.
Questions? Mrs. Ebner.
Am I correct in thinking that the Rising Star process replaces school improvement plans? Is that true?
Yes, Mrs. Ebner. For the 3 schools, the 2 schools in the district that did not meet the No Child Left Behind regulations, it will replace the traditional school improvement plans. Right now, there's mixed messages on whether or not this will be the only school improvement plan for all schools in the district. We're hearing conflicting information at this point. So it's possible that the entire district will eventually have to use Rising Star for its school improvement plan process.
We'll have 2 different processes.
It looks that way. We're waiting to hear if it looks at this point that the new school improvement plan, if it is to apply to the other schools, won't come online until next fall. So we might see it as early as next fall.
Anything else? Okay. Oh, Mrs. Stufen.
I just wanted to note that I was asked by Churchville, since I'm a school liaison to Churchville, from the employee base to the principal if a board member would participate. And I participated in each one of those meetings. I know that it goes against some of our, 4 to 6 meetings as a school liaison. They were very short meetings. It was very productive. 20 to 30 minutes early in the morning before the kids came to school, that these employees of ours were really looking at holistically based on, key performance indicators and data that we collect. What can we do? What can we do individually within our school community as the employees, as well as working with the parent group? So they actually extended the invitation to a parent representative during the process so that they could really reach out to every one of the components. I thought that it was very, it was very enlightening, and it's important for everyone to know that this is what we're doing here and the value and the benefits that we're going to reap. And I only say that because in my, my professional life, I have been trained in quality and business process improvement and benchmarking and the whole continuous improvement process. And it's very valuable, and it was interesting and good to see it happening here and the way that people were embracing it. I know that it is above and beyond their job responsibilities, if you will, in the, the generic terms, but that's typically the way that it is when a corporation or an organization brings in that process to improve. So it was good in the early stages. I did say that I would like to, continue on in the process, because to your point, it cannot be just something that is, the plan is shelved, but it certainly did not appear to be that way. And it doesn't appear to be that way at the district level, and through what the board is doing and our superintendent and all. So I thought that that was a good point for us to really articulate, not only to the other board members that didn't get that opportunity, but also to our taxpayers, to our community, that this is really a good way to do it. To really improve it. And there was actually a lot of ahas as to why we would need a data warehouse And that's good, too, because you cannot just be looking at your vacuum, because Churchville, you know, there's schools that feed into Churchville, and Churchville feeds into York, and it's the whole district. And so, therefore, you have to have linkages, and you have to watch the trends over time. So it's extremely valuable. I appreciate the fact that I was supported in participating, because it adds value for us as a board as we go through the, you know, DPIs and the vision and, you know, where we're taking the district from a governance standpoint.
Mr. McDonough.
Thank you for the presentation, and I think there's a perception out in the community that this is adequate yearly progress and No Child Left Behind is an external federal imposition on what's basically a local process of continuous improvement. And I think it's a tribute to your professionalism and all the professionalism of the administration to turn it into something really positive and to align it with the DPIs, which I thought were just an outstanding approach to improvement. I noticed that the trademark on these things, is this a state-owned product? It's not a product that Elmhurst is purchasing. It's a product that Elmhurst purchases as part of the state. I'm just curious, that's all.
Yeah, it is not owned by the state. The state might be purchasing it from IndyStar. There's no cost to District 205 to use the software. We're participants in the Illinois Interactive Report Card, but there's not a special fee for this particular tool.
And you did say that you made it align with what you're doing with the DPIs, and I thought that's great. And there was some key learning that you applied to the DPIs, but it did involve a devotion of resources, a certain amount of resources, as you said, in a very difficult year. And I think that's something that, you know, I think people should consider as they're rewriting these statutes that are imposed from above on a system. I mean, I think in this district there's a natural improvement process that's going on, and through Dave's leadership and your own leadership as well. And I'm impressed, very impressed with it.
Thank you. If you allow me, I just want to say one more time that the staff worked really, really hard on this, and there's real integrity behind these documents, and it was impressive to see their hard work and dedication throughout their whole process. It's something that I think we should all be proud of.
Mrs. Ebner, did you? Please.
Slide about there are 4 district goals. Could we see that slide? Okay. So the third goal, I mean, a lot of these things, most of this is staff, but that third goal there pertains to the school board. We should probably own that one with the superintendent. So school board and superintendent present a unified vision for school improvement. So maybe that goes to our board improvement committee to start conversation on that. I don't know, Dave, what are your thoughts?
Well, I
or
think
is it start staff first?
Well, I think it's both at the same time, but I think you've already, as John said, that says, are we going to have an aligned improvement process that aligns with the district goals, the board goals, the superintendent goals, all the way through to each building? And we're embarking on that process right now, as John pointed out. We made sure we aligned the DPI, the key DPIs, to that process. We were very concerned that we didn't want to go out on tangents and do one process that doesn't align to anything else. We've done that in education a lot. We want to avoid that. So we kind of forced this. We knew we had to do this improvement plan, but we didn't want to give up on what we were doing as a school district, so we kind of forced the issue and put it in there. And again, thanks to Charles and his leadership and his staff, they made that work. There was, we talked a lot about how the key DPIs would fit in that, what the key DPI indicators would tell us about the improvement process and doing that. So I think as we continue forward, I think you may see us coming back and saying, okay, how can we reinforce that the school board, the superintendent, the administration, and the staff are all in alignment on doing that? And we have talked about how we're going to present that to each building, the district school improvement plan. We think it's important that the administrators know what that process is and what those goals are, and then all the way down to our staff level about that process and how they align. So that is part of it. So, and I think we're already doing that.
Mrs. Hirsch?
You know, Mr. Pernot, on that along that same vein, I think, if I'm not mistaken, there was some work possibly that would be looked at in performance management? Or was this, I just wanted to clarify that which group would own it?
Yeah, as we move forward too, now that we have the strategic, the actual indicators, part of what we talked about in this process was what are now the next steps? Great, we have indicators. How do we start developing then strategic plans that will address those key performance indicators that we have identified as goals that the district wants to work on? So we had extensive discussions about what that might look like, and I think as we flesh this out, I think the Board Performance Management Committee is going to be part of that to say kind of a clearinghouse for two things. Number one, you're going to be the keepers of the data on a district-wide level, that, you know, you're going to be the data review team, and we may have some other people join you from the staff as part of that data review team. And then secondly, looking at the strategic plans that are submitted by staff and by administrators and by buildings on how we're going to improve in some of those areas, and having discussions about what those plans might create, what resources might they have to use, how are we going to fund those resources, all of those issues. So I think that's the next step in this evolution that you're going to see over the next 6 to 12 months.
And if I'm not mistaken, we actually have 2 Performance Management Committee meetings scheduled for January. And this was one of the topics that I believe that we were going to start the discussions around. So just in terms of, you know, initial discussions and get it going, I think we were talking about this being on performance management slate for January.
Yeah, and just conceptually how this all would look.
Anything else? Dr. Johns, thank you, and thank you to everyone who helped you in this entire process. Mr. Purnell.
Yeah, the next item is, reminds me of a sequel to a great movie. You know, part 1 was so great, we're going to do part 2. So if you remember right, Budget at a Glance we created last year. It was a big hit. People thought it was great information, and so there was a request for part 2, and part 2 is in front of you this evening's Facilities at a Glance. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Welton and Frank Hsu, who will go through this new document that I think is really great, that captures a lot of info in a very consolidated way.
Okay, thank you. This is the first of 2 documents that I'll be sharing with the board as a whole tonight. These are documents that the Finance and Operations Subcommittee has seen in a couple different versions as they've made their way towards their final version, and is being shared with the board as a whole for the first time tonight. The first is the Facilities at a Glance, or the son of Budget at a Glance. And what I want to do really quickly with it is kind of just do a walkthrough of the document, which was on board docs, to highlight the sections of the document and use some of the schools as examples of that, which will share some information. So what I'm going to do, anyone who actually has one of the documents, is start at the back. So the back has a summary of capital improvements since 2006. This was a direct request from the subcommittee as something as informational for what was done with the referendum money coming out of the 2006 building referendum, and also other expenditures during that time too. I don't want to imply to all of the projects on here were completed with those funds. There's a couple of different funding sources. But this represents the major improvements, building additions, and remodelings in the district since 2006. The page before that is titled Facility Highlights. This is kind of a data summary of the data that's spread throughout the pages for the various schools. It's a quick, easy place for referencing or comparing or seeing total numbers. A really neat feature that came from a bunch of different directions. We had recommendations from the committee for how to show the additions in the buildings, and then Kathy Schrader had the idea of color coding them by decade. So As you travel through the book and look at the various schools, each separate building in addition is marked out when it's built, and then they're color-coded by decade. So that's kind of a nice thing. So flipping back to the beginning then, we can walk through the schools, and I'll use what you see as a way to explain somewhat what it is. One of the main features that's prominent at the top of near the top of the first page for each school is the 5-year enrollment trends with the capacity line. There's a few things that should be noted about this. One is that these capacity numbers are based off of a national rule of thumb kind of 120 square feet per student at elementary, 140 square feet per student at middle school, and 160 square feet per student at the high school. They're a rough builder's rule of thumb, like I said. Actual national averages are even slightly below that, but new buildings tend to be around there or close to that, some much larger. It doesn't tell you anything about actual capacity of school unless you look at what the carrying capacity of the elements of the school are, the number of classrooms, and the way the building's utilized, but it's just a reference. With Madison, the first school we look at, the reason I single out is that blue line, which is just a guideline at best at the other schools, becomes completely meaningless at Madison. I want everyone to be aware of that. That 120 square foot number per student is the elementary recommendation. With the kind of specialized delivery of education and needs that the students at Madison have, it really becomes irrelevant. The school would be filled beyond capacity long before it reached that number. We moved to Edison. Edison, we can show you how the buildings lay out. In the case of Edison, there's an original 1956 building with the various additions all color-coded. Each of the pages are the same, so I won't belabor that as we travel through the book. Moving to Emerson, we come to our first school where you see an enrollment number bumping up against that line. Once again, I would indicate that that's not in any way a reason for panic. These are national averages. They don't represent absolute carrying capacity or limits. What is of note, and you'll see at the bottom of a number of them in Emerson, it says capacity issues also related to lunchroom. This is significant, where we made significant comments about areas where we do have capacity issues. When you look at the current way that we schedule and the current use of these are areas that are undersized for the population that they serve currently. So Emerson's lunchroom is probably slightly undersized. Fields would be probably the most seriously undersized of the lunchrooms if you're looking just at lunchrooms. Conrad Fisher, looking at their trend, you see a number that's higher than the line. Once again, that doesn't mean that there's kids at Conrad Fisher without desks or classrooms. That's not the case at all. But it does mean that you want to start to keep an eye on things like lunchroom and common spaces and look for any growths in the future that might require new classrooms. Every school has a highlight page, usually with a picture associated with it. I just use Hawthorne as an example to show you. They'll usually list 3 or 4 highlights, things about the school. These are architectural or structural or facility highlights. When putting out the questionnaires to get feedback from some of the administration and staff on the highlights needs of the buildings, they're all quick to point out that their real highlights are the involved parents, the bright and winning students, and the teachers. But past those, this is the facilities at a glance, so it shows facility highlights. Using Jackson School to show you what that chart in the middle of page 1 is. For each of the schools, you're going to see heating, air conditioning, electrical service, plumbing, fire suppression, roof, and building envelope. You'll see what the buildings have, what kind of boilers, whether they have air conditioning or not, what kind of electrical service they have, age and relative condition of that. Some of that will relate to needs that show up in the 10-year survey. Roof and building envelope needs are based off of a very comprehensive survey that we've done of all of the building envelope and roofs in the district to try to identify real needs. District practice in the past was to, with roofs, for example, was to replace them about every 15 years as they came out of warranty. Funding moving into the future isn't adequate for that, and it becomes really important for us to strategically look at which roofs actually do and do not need to be replaced, and that's reflected throughout this document. One note you'll see for Jackson Air Conditioning, it says window units variable. That's just a really polite way of saying the worst way to deliver air conditioning to a classroom. Some window units are in good shape, some are in mediocre shape, some are in bad shape, but they're all inefficient and loud and don't necessarily cool the way that the buildings that have central air do. And then other than that, you'll see even in those buildings that have largely window units, there's usually some areas that are cooled by a rooftop unit. Lincoln is, I highlighted in a couple different ways because it has some of our largest needs. Its capacity is not alarming and has actually been flat to shrinking, but it has an extremely small lunchroom for a building that size. I use Lincoln to show you what a needs list looks like because it has the longest list of needs of any of the buildings. Each of the buildings have needs, even a couple of them where it's just a few minor needs or things that have been identified in a 10-year survey. Lincoln's are large and in some cases significant, and all those will show up in the 10-year capital needs plan. I highlight out Brian's building envelope to explain why there's two different sections here and to show you how things will translate into the next document. You see there's some masonry that was found to be in worse shape than others. That's identified as needing immediate repair. There's some other masonry that's going to need repair soon. So when you see the 10-year survey, you should expect to see a dollar estimate for some masonry repair at Bryan soon and some others pushed back a couple of years. And that's just to illustrate how all the needs identified in this document, all the comments that came back from principals and staff were worked into the 10-year survey, along with the architect's 10-year survey and the building envelope and roof survey. Churchville also allowed me to sneak some pictures in, but has a long list of needs that I wanted to show because when you go to the 10-year document, you'll see that Churchville's totals are higher than most of the other buildings or middle schools. And this shows where they show up in this document. Sandburg, here's an example where I wanted to show that enrollment for the size of a building as Sandburg is below national averages. It's a large building, but has, for that many students, an extremely small physical education opportunity with just the one gym with one basketball court and one small fitness center servicing 690 students. I guess that's it for the walking through quickly the facilities at a glance. I don't know if you want to take any questions on facilities at a glance before we talk about the 10-year capital needs.
Ms. Hirsch.
I want to thank you. I've been asking for this for 4 years. This is exactly the kind of information that I've been looking for. We hear, you know, every year we're looking at our 10-year facility plan, and this is a much more comprehensive overview of all of our facility needs. And I think this is something that is going to be a great asset in terms of helping, again, people understand what our needs are. I'm sure that the Finance Committee has gone through this with a fine-tooth comb. I'm just going to, I appreciate your calling out the difference between the construction capacity in terms of square feet versus the limiting factors in individual buildings like gym space and lunchroom space. So I think that's very important to point out because although some buildings might look as though there's a lot of capacity, I appreciate you calling out the things that we're concerned about. So I'll just toss up for the next iteration of the facilities at a glance. The parking spot is something that is hard to gauge. You can look kind of in terms of the enrollment and the number of parking spots, but I'm sure that the needs vary at different buildings based on the grade level. So just for future additions, you know, maybe there's a count of staff versus parking spaces or the percentage of parking that's available for staff. I mean, obviously York has a different set of parking requirements because we provide student parking, but that's just something in the future that also might help be a gauge in terms of understanding. I was looking and trying to figure out, you know, if the parking number is adequate or not. So next generation. So, but thank you very much. This is going to be very, very helpful.
Anyone else? Mr. Bloom.
I'd like to thank you as well. This is fantastic. This is come out, every bit as nice as we envisioned when we started down the road with this project. I think the intent of this was to communicate to the public. These are long-lived assets. They last a long time, and they also take a long time to replace or maintain or whatnot. When you're making plans on investing capital in these types of assets, you need to take a long view. So this helps us establish current state and kind of where we are as we start to look at what our needs are as we go into the future. So, I think that was the purpose of putting this together. I think, the board is well served by having this and can start that discussion with the public. The other piece of that, too, and you're going to get into this, I think, next, but, it's 1.5 million square feet, which I think as a rule of thumb typically is around $1 a square foot for maintenance costs, so it's about $1.5 million a year is kind of the rule of thumb. And my understanding is we've been, probably on the low side of that for a number of years now, that we've been maintaining probably closer to the minimum end of the spectrum in the facility. So I think, due to budget constraints, it wasn't just, there was a people side of our budget that has taken a hit, but there's also the facility side of our budget that's taken a hit. And I think the last piece to add to kind of the next generation, we don't want to pile on now, but, as we move into the 21st century, in a manufacturing economy, your assets are bricks and mortar. As you get into a service and a knowledge economy, your assets are technology as well. And, I think as we talk about our facilities, there's one facility that's not in here, and that's the technology. It's not necessarily tangible, but it is every bit as much of an investment and as important to this district and our ability to move forward, as the bricks and mortar as we move into a 21st century education. And so, I think I'll touch on this a little bit later in our board communications. The last committee, we had a little bit of a discussion with David Smith. He's working on a technology plan, and that will, I would envision that getting integrated into this at some point in time as kind of another almost facility as we talk about it, because that's something we absolutely need to invest in, and those dollars can get significant just like this. So. So I just wanted to point those parts out, and Frank, correct me if I misstated anything on the maintenance side of it, but I think that's where we are.
The only thing I would clarify is I don't think I think the community stepped up at times with the referendum, and then in some of the other ways that we were able to raise capital. And there has been some spending in years that well exceeded that $1.5 million average or guideline that we've done over a long period of time. What we've done traditionally is it tends to be clumpy. We tend to spend large amounts in a small amount of time, and then we go years where we spend well below that. We've never had, it's never that even expenditure of renewal capital. Some of that's just for logistics and logical reasons, that there's some advantages of doing a lot of work at one time instead of always doing medium projects, and also some of it, of course, it's obviously based off of the necessity of financing. So.
Anything else for Mr. Hsu? Mr. Perneau?
Then I'm going to ask Frank to walk right into the 10-year capital improvements projects.
I'll start here. Really briefly, disclaimer: what the 10-year capital needs life safety survey and budget is not. This represents the cost of renewing and maintaining the facilities that we have now over the next 10 years with some improvements, but with the goal towards how we do things now. It's not a vision for what classrooms might look like 20 years from now or 8 years from now even. It's not a what could we do differently. It's not the what should we have a different kind of early childhood center, or is our high school all wrong? It's none of those things. It's looking at things the way we do them now, assuming that we continue to deliver roughly like we do now. What's it going to take to renew those assets and resources and keep them safe and usable? So that's what it is. The other piece is something that would be driven by, the community and curriculum and the board and obviously the taxpayers, those kinds of larger vision ideas. This is just letting everyone know what we need to do with what we have. So the 10-year facility, I have the first page, or at least a version of the first page up here. This is to explain how it works. So on the first page, you see tuck pointing masonry windows, and you see roof maintenance and replacement. So throughout the document is broken up by trades or by the type of work. Then underneath that, it'll be broken up by the school or by the project. Every item will then have a budget estimate next to it, and then it carries across to the various years. Currently, there's no accelerators attached to those numbers as we go through the years. And when I first started doing this, I routinely had a 3 or a 5% accelerator on the budget numbers moving across. And one of the things that did is, the truth is, construction costs have been extremely flat, if not negative, over almost the entire life of the budgets that I first was sharing with the board 6 and 7 years ago. So those numbers were greatly inflated to what the actual cost of those projects now are. So this just simply brings the numbers across, which, you know, leads the possibility that if the inflationary environment changes or construction environment changes, we have to rethink the way we do that. But right now, that's just how it is. What we have with 2013, you're going to see work that we're actually are recommending or have life safety amendments being approved or have just been approved for next year. From 2014-15, you're going to see some of the stuff that we're going to be required to do by life safety, the finishing of our life safety survey filter in. Most of those items get identified as 1 or 3 year items for how long you have to complete them from the time that we file the survey, which we'll do sometime in 2013. And then moving across, you have the other projects kind of with the current thought of how they might lay out going up through into the 2021. So that's how it works in each category. With the roofs, those are actual projections based off the current conditions of the roofs. One of the things I'd like to talk about briefly on this page is you see, besides the York Aquatic Center this year, which is a rather old piece of the building, you see some of the academic roofs showing up in 2017. One of the things I'm encouraging people to do is gain out of the habit of identifying York as the new York. The A building at York is now 10 years old, and during the course of this 10-year survey will be 20 years old. So items that have 15 and 20-year life expectancies are going to start needing to be renewed. One of the things that we've benefited over the last few years is having to spend comparatively little money refurbishing or renewing the high school. The boards that will live going into the future won't have that same luxury. The first of those things that will come up is some of the roofs. I wanted to make sure that people were aware that that was coming. So that shows you how the whole document works. I'm not going to walk through the whole document because you'd be bored and Chris would, you know, fire me. So I'll skip right down to the bottom. I'll skip right down to the bottom and talk about the totals and what this means and how we change it a little bit too based off of recommendations from the subcommittee. You see a total of $28 million of work identified at all the buildings. That includes life safety work, mandatory work, really good ideas and things that we need to do. However, with that said, you'll see $7 million of that is moved all the way over to the deferred. That's work that's a really good idea or probably should be done eventually someday. Maybe it's just boilers that are in good shape, but they're 40 years old and not efficient, things of that nature that have been moved over into that deferred column. That's work that should be thought about if the funding ever becomes available or when we get there, but it's obviously not something we forecast being able to do anytime soon. Other than that, you see how we broke up the $28 million going across. You'll see two lumps that are a little bit larger than the rest. The first of those is 2018. That's just, and keeping in mind, this is a living document based off of recommendations from board members, conversation, things that we learn and find out. It changes year to year, is always being updated. So sometimes things move up or back based off of new information. But for right now, we've kind of pushed the work we're avoiding doing at Lincoln to 2018. So that's why that number hops up to a little larger than normal. So most of that $2.7 million that shows up there is Lincoln related. Then in 2019, we see a lot of work that's been, is possible work or is work that has been deferred or hasn't been done at Churchville being lumped together in 2019. So those are just listed as possible years for that work to occur for the board to understand the need and what's out there and not necessarily if they're going to happen in that year. Responding to wanting to have all the needs and all the comments in the facilities at a glance, translating this document, I put together some just really rough possible construction numbers to identify some of the missing pieces that principals and others identified as we did the facilities at a glance. Those are listed below the total, so they wouldn't total in. But that show, and those are just raw construction numbers based off of how big an auditorium might be or how big that addition might be. There's no actual budget work that goes into those numbers, so that's the only thing I would caution. The last thing I'd do is broke it out a little bit by a few of the schools. Lincoln's needs over the 10 years. These are the needs of things that have to be taken care of. Lincoln, most of which show up in that 2018 column currently, but there's about $3.2 million worth of work identified there. Down below you see possible additions based off of short space and or what construction costs for a new Lincoln might look like. Churchville has the longest list of needs, so I included that. That's $6 million, it's over $6 million, most of which parks in 2019, which is why that number spikes. York I included because it's almost half of the square footage of the district, and while comparatively it still costs us less per square foot over time to take care of than the rest, just the actual size of it does lead that number to being somewhat significant. And right now we show over $4 million in needs over the next 10 years at York. And I include Madison because Madison has probably received the least spending and renewal money over the last 30 years. It has kind of a checkered history of passing out of our use to the Park District and back to us, and still has the boilers and pipes and windows and doors and pretty much everything else it had back when it ceased being a school in 78, 79. So that's Madison. And then the last slide shows the Fund 60 are capital projects, working cash bond money, and the Fund 90 fire prevention and safety funds. It shows a possible maximum sale for this year based off of the life safety amendments that have been passed. It shows recommended 2013 projects and possibly what those fund balances might look like at June 30th, 2014, as we would consider any projects for next year. So that's the 10-year capital project survey in a glance.
Any questions for Mr. Hsu? Mrs. Ebner.
So based on those fund balances, what are some solutions for meeting the needs of, each of these years? How do you get there? I mean, there's a big gap here.
Bake sale or talk to Chris. Like I said, we put together the needs and the identified projects that will have to be done over the course of a long period of time, some of which obviously can move or be deferred, but I don't have funding options actually in this survey, so I can't really answer that.
Just to clarify Mrs. Ebner's question, now you've identified $28 million worth of projects, or I should say our architects have identified those to keep us up to life safety standards. And maybe $7 million of those can be deferred out 10 years. So at minimum, you've identified $21 million worth of projects that we need to do over the next 10 years. And how much money is in that capital improvement budget?
Well, it's right in front of us. At the end of this year, if we sold the $1.9 million in bonds, we'd have around $2 million, well, close to $2 million in funds, depending on where the budget comes in this year. We tend to run a little under. To fund $21 million worth of projects, which is, I think, Mrs. Ebner's point. So, yeah. So, Mr. Bloom.
I mean, the committee tried to get our arms around, number one, the current state, number two, kind of what Frank's projections are. One other piece of this, Chris, how much do we fund out of the general fund in maintenance CapEx? I mean, we spend a decent amount of money out of that too, but I mean, that's the only other alternative for this is to pull it out of a general fund. And so, I think when I started adding this up, there's about $4 million over the next 2 years, and if you look at the fund balance, I think it's about $2.5 million in cash, and we're looking at, the resolution in front of us today is for another $2 million, so you got about, $4.5 million on that 3.9. So I think part of the reason why we wanted to go after this facilities at a glance was we see a runway here. We've got a couple, 2-3 years here, but we also see where the story's going to end. And so we need to have that conversation, particularly given that we're not particularly flush on the general fund side to be able to start to fund some of this stuff. So we need to start that conversation. But particularly when we do capital investment too, it needs to have a long-term view associated with it, so that if you're going to make some, repairs today, what is the cost of that versus, a larger spend on a bigger project or improvement? Or if you're going to do something in 5 years or 6 years or 7 years, would you not put a classroom, on one side of the building if you knew that a potential expansion plan would require you to rip that off in 5 years? So these are the types of discussions that we want to have. What you see here is very preliminary. We saw at the last meeting Frank's spreadsheet. We've been looking through mainly format of this. The content is somewhat new as well. And I think that these are the pieces that we wanted to put on the table for the board, because this probably isn't entirely a discussion that happens at the committee. It's what it should happen here as we start talking about what our plans are to address exactly the issue that you pointed out.
Mrs. Hirsch.
Many years ago, there was a discussion and an effort by a previous board to carve out part of the funds that were our normal operating funds and dedicate those funds to facilities maintenance, to try to say, if it's $1 a square foot, then we're going to carve out $1 million. But financial pressures over time, enrollment increases. I mean, we know all the stories that we've been struggling with, but I think, one thing that long-term I would encourage the board to consider is, setting forth some guidelines, considering making an alteration to policy or speaking through policy in terms of what the board's priorities are, in terms of we have policy that dictates our fund balances and what we are aiming for. We have, I don't know that it's necessarily written in policy, but there is a very strong understanding that the board works very hard to avoid tax anticipation warrants. We really look to seek enough fund balances to get us through those low points. Those are things that we have really codified. And I think it would be very challenging to do in our current fiscal environment, but I think it's also, I think we kind of talked about it. It's one of our long-term obligations is to protect these physical plants and to ensure that, the long-term integrity of these buildings is not at risk. And so I would encourage, a discussion around, I'm not saying that that should become a new policy. I'm saying I think there should be a discussion around, we enter into long-term contracts with all of our employees, and it's something that we should also consider. I think, Mr. Boom, I also agree in terms of technology and carving out and setting aside and making a priority the investments that we want to make in our network infrastructure, in our facilities, so that we can ensure that we're ready for the park exams. We can be sure that we are ready to move our kids forward. Because again, we have ramp, we see these things coming, and as it's very tempting and it's very difficult to struggle with year-to-year budget shortfalls and cutting teachers and increasing class sizes. But at some point, we have to be careful and set some priorities. So it's a fine balance, but I encourage discussion on it and long-range thinking, and I think that's something that the full board would benefit from, those types of discussions.
Anyone else? Yeah. Mr. McDonough.
I think these two things need to be viewed together, and I think you've integrated them really well. And I just urge the public to take a look at these things. There's some serious needs here, but as Chris described, there's some time to decide what's the best way to go about it. But they need to be viewed together. The problems, or I'm sorry, the needs on each page of each school, they all show up in the 10-year program. Is that right?
Yes,
almost each and every bullet point under the word need shows up as a number somewhere in this 10-year plan. Is that right?
Right. That was the intention, yes.
Excellently put together. And they'll be on the website side by side. Is that right? Or I mean,
correct. They're both on board docs currently, so they should be available for viewing.
Okay.
And I would just really quickly, I wanted to amend my answer earlier because I realized I was a little bit flippant and I didn't probably have the best answer at hand that I could have had. on the funding question. I think the board originally did, when the rate increase referendum was passed a number of years ago, fully believed and hoped that they projected that there would be fund surpluses out after a certain number of years and that we would be able to address these kinds of needs without cyclical borrowing. But obviously some of the pressures that were mentioned, and also, of course, the slowdown and near stopping of new growth made it so that we never realized those surpluses. So that non-borrowing funding of this hasn't come to pass, but obviously the needs still have.
Mr. Bloom?
I just want to put a couple of numbers to the magnitude of the thing you just said. So when that referendum was done in '06, new growth was something around $80 million, and new growth this year is going to be $15 million. So I just want to put a little order of magnitude around the shock that our budget has had since that promise was made.
And that gap, I think, is the funding that's not there now for the...
Mrs. Stufen.
I just wanted to clarify, these documents are the facilities at a glance and the 10-year plan, facilities plan, are on board docs, but they will be or are on the website for all community members to see. They will be. Okay, yeah.
Mrs. Durrani?
Just one last comment, in that it's a shame that all of the secure entrances that we've been talking about building for years since the first school shooting are all of necessity pushed out 10 years. We just don't have the funds to do that. And a lot of the schools need them.
Yeah, I mean, we have a great document here. We have some great planning done by Mr. Shue and Mr. Welton. It's up to us to make sure we don't waste the opportunity that we have to look down the road and set a plan forth to be able to fund this. That is on us. Are there any other comments? Thank you, Mr. Shue. The next is the approval of board meeting minutes, and I will point out that we still have 2 pages of agenda to get through this evening. The approval of November 13th board meeting minutes. Are there any changes that anyone would like to see to those minutes? Mrs. Stufen.
I actually have 2 changes. On page 6, communication reports, 3rd paragraph, and I can send them to Ellen as well. I just wanted to modify the first 2 sentences so that they're accurate. It says, Mrs. Stufen updated the board members on her meeting with the LEND Executive Director and Federal Relations Liaison. It should say that the committee is working on the presentation and meeting discussion points for when we meet with the legislators. And then one last comment is on page 15, board communications, the first paragraph. It's just related to the students that were at the playing with the Elmhurst Symphony Orchestra. It's the 4th sentence. It should state that several current students, as well as a graduate of District 205, performed with the ESO.
How about that, Mrs. Walsh? Thank you. Anything else? I have a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
So Mrs. Hirsch moved to approve the November 13th, 2012 board minutes as amended, seconded by Mr. McDonough. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. Motion carries. Minutes are approved. Next is board committee reports, and again, with 2 pages of agenda to get through, I would encourage efficiency of delivery here. First is the Board Improvement and Policy Committee.
Okay, so we had 3 policies that we reviewed. The first one, family medical leave, really what we're doing is it's making the policy in alignment with current and past practice, so you'll be seeing that policy. We have the committee policy coming up for second reading in this meeting here. hiring and process and criteria. It was just a brief press update that we approved, and you'll see it on future meetings. Then we moved into board improvement and community relations. We highlighted several things that we're working on as improvement for our board processes, one of which is related to our committee policy, but it's also putting in place some guidelines around our committee structure. So the committee reviewed what was published first round, and I'm working with the other committee chairs to make sure, are there any last changes that they want to make to their specific committee structure, and then that will be published to the full board. Community engagement, we briefly talked about the PTA forum, and just so that you know that we're using the PTA members' notes and providing responses to the issues that came up at that community forum, and then any specific issues that are related to any of our board committees will be brought to the co-chairs and addressed at the committee level. Legislative engagement update. We're sending legislative congratulatory letters to all of our elected officials as of the November 6th election. We're still awaiting a few of the newly elected legislators' addresses to get those out. The committee discussed the assignment of board members with legislators based on current relationships and interest. So we have some of those assignments in place. Once again, if any board members are interested in being assigned to legislators, let me know, and we will make those assignments. And then I wanted to highlight that the committee assigned me to finalize a presentation, which was sent to the committee, and we looked at it and that was the first presentation was put together with Mr. Pruneau and our board president, and we actually had stated in our committee that the 3 key discussion points that we want to be consistent with all of our legislators are around pension reform, unfunded mandates, and fully funding education. So actually, our superintendent, Mr. Pruneau, our board president, Mr. Collins, and I met with our very first legislator, a newly elected senator in District 23, Tom Cullerton, wanted to meet with us before he went to Springfield, and so he visited York, he visited Field, and then he had a meeting with Mr. Pruneau, Mr. Collins, and myself. Board improvement updates, some highlights are just around, we'll have a committee meeting of the whole. In January, our December 26th committee meeting is being canceled, and then the school liaison program guidelines, just be on the lookout for those the final guidelines that will be sent to the full board based on our discussions, and it will also be posted on our website.
Thank you. Curriculum and instruction.
We've had 2 meetings since the last board meeting, and most of these topics have been covered, Rising Star and Community Forum. So there is one topic that we haven't touched on tonight, and this is the English Language Learner Community Forum. We're planning a forum for our ELL community students in February. And we're going to invite a large, a variety of people, administrators from different districts that have gone through this process, parents, teachers, expert of the book that we read, Dr. Sotero. So we want to get a lot of people in the room, a lot of different voices in the room to talk about our program goals, legal requirements, our district's rationale for providing ELL services, and discuss experiences, and just try to get a better understanding from all sides of how we can best move forward with this program while being in compliance with the state. So that will be scheduled for February. That's it. We've covered the rest of it.
Okay. Thank you. Finance and operations.
We can make this brief too, because a lot of this has been covered. Despite some of the financial gloom and doom that's been going on as we've gone through our budget and our tax levy and all the other things, I am happy to report that we discussed both the October and then the November and the next meeting financial reports, and we are at least on our budget. So thanks to Mr. Welton, because he's got a great no button that helps keep us right on our budget. But so I just want to report that we're on budget. Those financial reports are posted on board docs in detail. We looked at the facilities at a glance. We went through that. We went through long-term facilities planning. One of the things I did want to highlight is one of the issues that we heard at the PTA meeting, I want to make sure it didn't get lost, was they talked about the Churchville activity bus and the ride times there. We discussed that in committee. I think that that's an issue that's going to be reviewed at the end of the year as we look at our activity bus policy going into next year. So I just want to make sure that it's noted that it was noted and we are looking at it. But we have made decisions for this budget year that we will revisit as part of our budget cycle. As far as the meeting we had on December 11th, I talked about the November monthly financial report. The technology plan and budget. Dave Smith joined us to alert us to the fact that he's working on it. We should see it as part of the budget process, but that said, he wanted to highlight that the last couple of years have benefited from the upgrade cycle being relatively small as far as the number of pieces of equipment and laptops and network upgrades and things like that we've had to do. Unfortunately, the next 2 years aren't looking that favorable to us. We are going to need a significant amount of capital investment in the technology infrastructure, both in the hardware side and the network side. I think David is in the process of putting a plan together and evaluating financing options, whether it's leasing versus paying cash and buying. And he had just brought to us that initial heads up. While he works, the full board will see the entire report, I think, coming up on the budget cycle. But I think this year's dedicated towards WAN, the wide area network throughout all our buildings. You're connecting all our buildings. Next year, or this year, the upcoming fiscal year, the following fiscal year will be dedicated towards local area networks within the building, all in support of instructional, professional development and classroom-based technologies that are proliferating in the district, and these are necessary investments to keep us, and I think I'll say, I won't say keep us at the leading edge, because I think our philosophy is to be a fast follower. We'll let other districts spend the money to figure it out, and then when they come up with a great idea, we'd like to be in a position to very quickly adopt that idea. And so right now, one of the big limiting factors and bottlenecks is bandwidth. And so that's a big piece of this investment, along with the laptops and desktops and things like that. So I just wanted to give a heads up that that's going to be part of the new budget process. Dave was nice enough to give us some budget cuts over the last 2 years, and now I think he's trying to take some of them back. So at any rate.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is the superintendent's consent agenda. Are there any items that any member of the board would like removed for further discussion and separate consideration? Mrs. Deroni.
Item O and item R.
Any others? Okay. So first, can I have a motion to approve the Mrs. Hirsch? Thank you.
I move that we approve the superintendent's consent agenda items A through T, except items O and R. I think I have that right.
Second.
Okay. Moved by, the motion on the floor is to approve the superintendent's consent agenda items A through T, with the exception of items O and R. Moved by Mrs. Hirsch, seconded by Mrs. Deroni. Just to give a very quick overview of what remains on this list is a personnel report, financial reports, approval of school improvement plans for York High School, Churchville Middle School, and the district improvement plan, approval of new and modified York High School courses, approval of high school and middle school instructional materials, approval of an amendment to the nursing services contract with Elmhurst Hospital, approval of a bid for some bike racks, approval of a bid for cold beverage contract services, approval to renew online student registration services, approval to open designated closed session minutes and keep all other closed session minutes closed, approval to authorize the destruction of verbatim recording of closed session minutes in compliance with state law, approval of a donation to Edison Elementary School, approval of the York Student Enrichment Team YSET grants, approval of a donation to York High School, and then some approvals of various policies, gifts to the districts, extracurricular athletics, the approval of policy reference that we use from the Illinois Association of School Boards Press Policy Manual updates, and finally, approval of the press update, the second reading for Section 4. So, with all that said, all in favor, I'm sorry, we need a roll call vote for this. I'm sorry. Mrs. Walsh, if you would please call the roll.
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Mrs. Droney?
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner?
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen?
Yes.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes. We have 7 ayes, no nays. The motion carries. Discussion of, well, first, we have a motion of each one, O and R, separately, please. Let's start with motion for item O. Mrs. Hirsch.
I move that the Board of Education accept as a second reading and adoption the revisions to Policy 2:150 committees, which will become effective at the time of its adoption and subsequently be added to the policy manual for the Board of Education, Section 2, Board of Education.
I'll second. Oh, I'm sorry.
I second that motion.
All right. Moved by Mrs. Hirsch, seconded by Mrs. Stufen. The motion on the floor is to approve the revised policy number 2:150 committees. So any discussion, please? Mrs. Droney.
I think that in the revision of this policy, we've struck an important power of the board, which is to allow the majority of the board to form or to ask that the president form an ad hoc committee at any time during the year. I think that that particular provision was taken out of the revision of the policy, and it should be put back in. Just on the chance that there might be a contentious board that might want to have an ad hoc committee to study an important issue at some point along the way.
I'm sorry, I don't see it. I'm looking at page 1 of what's attached in board docs, and it looks like there is, at the bottom, ad hoc committees may be created for specific tasks or to investigate special issues.
Seems like I think Mrs. Droney's point is one sentence too many might have been edited out of that policy. Mrs. Droney, if you want to point out the sentence that you would recommend that the board re-include in that policy, I think that might be helpful.
What we have to do is strike the sentence at the end of the paragraph that says the ad hoc committee will follow the same guidelines and procedures as the standing committees, because that just allows the board president to form the committee and to form it at one time in the year, right after the reorganization meeting. The sentence right below that that was struck should be returned to the policy that says the president of the board may appoint special or ad hoc committees and their chairpersons and members at the annual organization or as appropriate and necessary at any other time, and that the Board of Education, upon majority vote, may direct the president to establish standing committees or to appoint a special or ad hoc committee at any time. I think you want that provision in your policy on committees. You don't want an ad hoc committee just being able to be appointed at one time of the year and only by the president. You want the board to have the power to do that as well.
Does that make sense to everyone? Mrs. Stufen?
Yes, I think it does. I think that's exactly how I think it's the way that we'd want it. I know that we were trying to have everything inclusive, but I agree that we should, instead of referencing that last sentence, the ad hoc committee will follow the same guidelines and procedures as the standing committees, I do agree that we should strike that and keep the paragraph in the following paragraph, which is in the current policy, to remain. And if we make that change, I think that it represents what we want, which is the standing committees are when we do the reorganization, it's, that time of year. But we allow any board member to propose, and with majority vote, to initiate not standing committees, excuse me, ad hoc committees for issues that we need to address during the year.
Mrs. Deroni's suggestion makes sense to me as well. Mrs. Deroni?
I move to amend the motion to change the policy to strike the sentence, to strike the sentence, the ad hoc committee will follow the same guidelines and procedures as the standing committee, and to insert the sentence, the president of the Board of Education may appoint special or ad hoc committees and their chairpersons and members at the annual organization meeting or as appropriate and necessary at any other time, including the following sentence, insert the Board of Education upon majority vote may direct the president to establish standing committees or to appoint a special or ad hoc committee at any time.
I second that motion.
Moved by Mrs. Deroni, seconded by Mr. McDonough. I'm not going to make an attempt for accuracy's sake to repeat all that. Any further discussion? Now we have this motion on the floor to amend. Hearing none. Mr. McDonough?
Does this go back to first reading, or what happens when we make an amendment on the floor?
No, you can amend the motion tonight. This will be the second reading, and then you can adopt it tonight if the board's comfortable with that.
Is this something we'd like to adopt this evening? Otherwise, I think we send it back to committee. Okay, very good. Okay, so all in favor of the motion on the floor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Policy is amended.
No, that just amended.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. All right, so we've amended the motion. Now, let's vote on the amended motion that's on the floor. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. The amendment carries and the motion carries. The policy is adopted as stated by Mrs. Deroni. So next on our agenda is item R, approval of revised policy 7:60 on residence. Can I have a motion, please?
Oh, sorry.
I move that the Board of Education accept as a second reading and adoption revisions to policy 7:60 residence, which will become effective at the time of its adoption and subsequently be added to the policy manual of the Board of Education, Section 7 students.
I second that motion.
Moved by Mrs. Hirsch, seconded by Mr. McDonough to accept revised policy 7:60. Any discussion? Mrs. Deroni.
I'm going to be voting no on this policy. Once again, you've heard my concerns in the past. I have them here to repeat if you would like, but at the lateness of the hour, I would simply say there's only one thing new I have to add, and that is the policy without a future effective date, which it does not have, is really unfair to those families who didn't know that we might be changing this policy midstream. And that's my only other addition to the other points of 90 days being what the superintendent suggested. We made it longer than that, and the fact that the semester doesn't work for anybody but the high school.
Your brevity is appreciated, and I think we are familiar with your other concerns. Any other discussion? Mr. McDonough, looks like you're preparing to say something.
Yes, I would like to make a motion to amend the motion to add the following to that motion, not to the policy. Provided, however, that is the intention of the board to apply such policy to students attending as tuition-paying students at any time during the 2012-2013 school year.
Do I have a second to Mr. McDonough's motion to amend the motion?
Right.
He's just...
It's the same thing I did last week. That's the first reading.
Well, I think what Mr. McDonough is suggesting here is that we are clear that this new policy apply to this current entire school year. Because as Mrs. Duroni pointed out, it was unclear as to when that policy would take effect and the ramifications it would have on any students who are currently paying tuition in the district.
That's exactly what I intended.
So I think, so I don't get confused here, we need to, first of all, vote on Mr. McDonough's motion. And did I hear a second on that? Was there a second to Mr. McDonough's motion?
Can I say?
Okay, moved by Mr. McDonough, seconded by Mr. Bloom. Mr. McDonough, if you wouldn't mind repeating, just for clarification.
Let me read the entire motion.
As amended,
as amended, or as proposed to be amended. That the Board of Education accept as a second reading and adoption revisions to Policy 7:60 residents, which will become effective at the time of its adoption and subsequently be added to the policy manual of the Board of Education, Section 7, students, provided, however, that it is the intention of the board to apply such policy to students attending as tuition-paying students at any time during the 2012-13 school year. The intention of my motion to amend being to clarify that we're going to apply this policy to anyone who was a tuition-paying student during this year and make that explicit.
So moved by Mr. McDonough, seconded by Mr. Bloom. All in favor?
Point of order. Discussion, please, on the amendment.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Mrs. Duroni.
That is the very thing that I think is unfair, and that is that anybody who wanted to come and pay tuition at start of school in September had no idea that there was a possibility that tuition might be refunded. Those families approached the district with the understanding that if they had to pay tuition, they had to pay tuition for however long they were here. And that is my first point that I made earlier, that is what is unfair to all those other families who didn't know about that possibility and couldn't take advantage of that. So I will be voting no against the amendment and the motion.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Okay, so our first vote is to accept Mr. McDonough's amendment. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no.
No.
Motion carries. The second vote, now, is there any further discussion on the original motion as amended? Mrs. Hirsch.
I've been struggling with this one, and as much as I would like to offer families who move into the district mid-year an opportunity to recoup those expenses, I can't support this at this time. I think that it's just not something I could support at this time. So I am unfortunately going to have to be voting no on this particular changed policy.
Any other discussion? Okay, now to vote on the policy as amended, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no.
No.
The motion carries. Yes, the next on our agenda is the superintendent's agenda action items. Mr. Pernod.
Yes, the next section is really all resolutions that we will be offering for the Board of Education tonight. The first one is approval of a resolution providing for the issue of not to exceed $7.250 million general obligation refunding school bonds, Series 2013A, for refunding purposes. Mr. Welton, and I believe you have Elizabeth Hennessy will be presenting this. So,
Hennessy, let me first say thank you for your patience this evening. Also, just for clarification, Elizabeth would like to start with item C, I believe is what she's suggesting, which is approval of the resolution providing for the issue of not to exceed $3 million in general obligation limited tax school bonds for life safety project purposes. So we are starting with C, not A. Elizabeth?
Thank you. Sorry for any confusion on this, but the resolutions went out to the board prior to us hearing back from the state of Illinois what life safety projects were in fact approved. So the law prevents us from approving any more than the amount of the life safety approvals. We did receive the life safety approvals back from the Illinois State Board of Education in an amount of $1,963,378.80. So that is what I would hope we could amend the C, approval of resolution providing for the issue of not to exceed $1,963,370, or it's actually $1,960,000 because we have to round to the 5,000. So that is the amendment I was hoping we could look at for that life safety resolution, and perhaps do that resolution in the motion and the amendment first.
So, do I hear a motion for item C? Mrs. Ebner?
I move that the Board of Education approve the resolution providing for the issue of not to exceed
$1.96
million. $1.96 million general obligation limited tax school. Whoops, sorry. General obligation limited tax school bond series 2013B for life safety project purposes.
Second.
Thank you. Just a little point of discussion. Okay, sorry.
Moved by Mrs. Ebner. Sorry, moved by Mrs. Ebner, seconded by Mr. McDonough. The motion on the floor is to approve a resolution providing for the issuance not to exceed $1.96 million for general obligation limited tax school bonds, Series 2013B, for life safety project purposes. Ms. Hennessy, thank you.
Sorry about that. And maybe we need to have the vote before the direction. This, I do believe, is the correct form of the resolution, which you have with the L on it in your pack. The discussion I wanted to bring up is that the district has, as Frank pointed out in his presentation, $875,962 of funds on hand in the life safety fund, which can only be used for life safety projects. If the district wants to go ahead and issue up to the $1,963,378.80, it may. But if you look on the next page, the interest that these bonds, as we've looked at in the past, are paid from the debt base, and they can't, the principal can't really be retired until some of that old principal is retired, which is currently in about the 2026, 2027 levy year. So these bonds are, just by their nature, a little bit longer amortization. The interest cost is about 3%. So we could either issue the, and I'm just looking for direction here, I'm not looking for anything on the motion. We could issue the $1,960,000 as approved by the state, or we could issue closer to $1 million and use our cash on hand. And so from a financial point of view, because your cash is earning very low interest, it's probably a good idea to use your cash and borrow less. If
I know you have a lot of life safety projects coming down the road. Those life safety projects are part of the survey that has not been completed yet. So if you issue the full 1.9 million, you would have that additional 870,000 to start putting towards your next issues. But just from a financial standpoint, because we're in a very low interest rate environment and these bonds are out there 13 years, it might make sense to use your cash, which is earning very little in investments, and then do an addition and just issue $1 million, or in this case, it'd be about $1,087,000 or so in bonds.
Mr. Bloom.
And I think we'd had somewhat of this discussion back when we started with the refunding, which we'll get to, which is our strategy was to refund in installments each January. Our current strategy, again, to be revisited every year. And I think we had talked about is while we may be able to issue closer to $2 million worth of bonds, you don't want to borrow more than you can spend in a 12-month period, and we've got some cash on our balance sheet, and it wouldn't cost us any more to issue $1 million now and $1 million next January, because we're going to do another refunding next January anyway, so we were looking at that cost. And I think that the general thought at this point in time is to potentially split that. Chris was going to do a little bit more work on kind of looking at where the needs are and how they lay out to make sure that we have enough cash to keep us busy. But we don't, I think our desire is not to have a lot of cash sitting on the balance sheet. But one of the questions I had, though, is that ultimate decision, does that need to come back as far as the issuance goes, or are we vesting this authority in who makes that call, I guess is what I'm saying.
The parameters resolution authorizes the board president, the chair of finance, and the assistant superintendent for finance to approve the final sale amount. But I thought I would bring up direction here, because we don't, we want to prepare documents to get in the market, and we could come back to you in between and make that final decision, but I just thought we'd see if we could get some clarity on 1 million versus 2 million of life safety bonds.
Sure. And Chris, I think we were leaning towards $1 million, and I guess I'd ask the board for guidance on how much communication you guys want on that final decision. I think that we're going to really take into account Chris's counsel when that number's set. And I think, Chris, we're still running through kind of analysis on how much you want to do, or do you have an idea right now?
I agree with what Elizabeth's saying. Maybe 1 million would be the best route at this time, and come back next year for another 1 million in life safety bonds.
Mrs. Hirsch.
Given Mr. Welton's recommendation and your recommendation, I would be very comfortable passing the resolution up to 3 million and giving the direction that 1 million is appropriate at this point in time, and reserve the other monies for a future choice, a future decision. So I would actually prefer that the full board discuss it, and the full board give direction to those who are authorized to go ahead and give that direction. So that's just, one board member's opinion, but I think I would prefer that the full board be involved in the discussion. If it were a question of 1 million versus 1,050,000, I'll trust the administration on that, but I think that, 1 versus 2, I think we have it in front of us now, so if we're comfortable chiming in, we chime in, give the direction, and move on.
I think the decision before us, right, is right. So our cash earns very little. Versus it would cost us about 3% to earn this money. If interest rates go up, and they have, about 35 basis points in 1 week's time, given that we're a little closer today to solving the fiscal cliff dilemma in Washington, if interest rate goes up, it clearly costs you more to borrow that next million a year from now. Now, none of us have a crystal ball. We just have to make the best decision we can right now. And what makes sense right now. So I guess we have to place what the utility value, what our utility value that we place on cash on hand is, versus draining this budget down perhaps in the next year to almost nothing, and then coming back to the market to borrow another $1 million to replenish that budget. There is no right answer, I don't think. It's just what we think is best at the moment. Please.
I'm going to agree with the recommendation for all the reasons why they're previously discussed, so.
Mr. McDonough?
Just so I understand that, we pass a resolution of 1.96 million tonight.
It's
That's
parameters
up
of-
to.
yeah.
And we're delegating to this committee of 3 to determine how to do it in chunks, and what you're doing is taking a sense of the board now, or the committee members are taking a sense of the board to probably, based on Mr. Welton's recommendation, go in for 1 million now and sometime later. How long does this resolution go on for? Does it expire for
6
the?
months.
6 months. So in the next 6 months, this will expire and we would have to do another resolution for the rest of it next year. Is that it?
Well, the intent is that, number one, we get you enough money to complete your projects this summer, which is, I think, based on Frank's presentation, is just around $2 million. So between the bond proceeds and the cash on hand, you'll have enough to get those projects done. Now, there's a bunch of other life safety things in your survey which have not been approved but are being worked on right now that are going to come down the road, which will give you more authority to issue additional life safety bonds should you need to. The other part of this, which is coming up in motions A and B, is that our strategy, as discussed at prior meetings, is to issue 10 million or less in a calendar year, so we're able to take advantage of that bank qualification, where we get 30 basis points, 15 to 30 basis points less on the interest rate. And so we'd like to combine with that million the resolution that we're going to be talking about next for the refunding. So that allows that number to go up as we get a little direction in this lower number in this.
Mr. Bloom?
Yeah, can I just summarize then? So what I think we're asking is approval for $1,960,000, which, because from a mechanical standpoint, having that done and out there is advantageous given market movements. But what I'm hearing from the board is that you'd like an update if there was any change from our current intent to sell about $1 million worth of bonds. We want to maintain the flexibility to sell more than $1 million. But right now, the intent is to send $1 million, and if that, if Chris comes up with some numbers or something comes up where we need to issue more, there's an opportunity to come back to the board, but we don't have to go through this process of approving any more parameters, resolutions, or things like that. So we would be in a position to issue those bonds based on a very quick kind of nod of heads of the folks here. So I think that's the path forward. I think that's sitting on the table right now is you're going to provide flexibility while at the same time kind of agreeing on a soft circle of about $1 million and leaving it at that.
Is that the board's consensus? Yes, I see a lot of nodding heads. Anyone doesn't like that idea? Okay. Right. Joe, please go ahead.
If we would have approximately just under $1 million left, but then would you wait until the following January if you do any refunding? So you're not going to do anything the second half of the year with life safety then? You'd wait?
Right, yeah. I mean, given what this second resolution that we're going to pass, we're probably going to make a decision on the refunding in January or very early in the year, which will then cap us and will be, so from a practical standpoint, once these issues will be done together. Right. So it's not like you'll probably tap most of the wild card is Dave's still working on, are we going to buy this technology equipment? It's $1.5 million worth of equipment that we have that he's looking at for next year. Are we going to buy it or are we going to lease it? If we lease it, it counts towards our, that 10 million. So now we have to issue less. So that's the one reason why we're going to pass kind of up to maximums. That number is going to be the plug. The other ones are going to fall out, and we're going to go ahead and do it. But it'll all be done at the same time, probably in January.
Okay.
In other words, if we borrow $960,000 less for life safety bonds, we can refinance $960,000 more of the existing debt.
I just want to do it together so you save on the fees.
Yes.
Part of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have a motion on the floor, which is to approve the resolution providing for the issue not to exceed $1.96 million of general obligation limited tax school bonds, Series 2013, for life safety purposes, with the idea being that it's the consensus of the board to delegate the authority to that committee of three, but with the idea that unless market circumstances prevail where this is a compellingly great idea to issue 1.96, that only $1 million of life safety bonds would be issued and more refunding would occur in its place. So, do I need a roll? Yes, we're spending money, so I need a roll call, don't I? Mrs. Walsh, please.
Mrs. Ebner?
Yes.
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen?
Yes.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
Mrs. Duroni?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes. 7 ayes, no nays, the motion passes, and I wish to amend my statement that we're spending money. We're not spending money, we're borrowing money. Right. So, Ms. Hennessy, which item number would you like to address next?
A, which is the resolution in your packet that has an R on it for refunding. This is, again, a not to exceed $8.9 million of refunding bonds. This is refunding the Series 2006A again. And in your little packet, I put the estimated savings as of today if we were to refund all those bonds. And the estimated savings right now is over $1 million. But so I think it's important to recognize that these are not to exceed amounts and that this amount will be reduced when the final amount of technology leasing is determined. And now we have the direction on the life safety bond, so we can reduce that by $1 million.
Okay, I need a motion.
$8,900,000.
Mrs. Duroni.
I move that the Board of Education approve the resolution providing for the issue of not to exceed $8.9 million general obligation refunding school bonds Series 2013A for refunding purposes.
Second.
Any discussion? None? Okay. One thing I would like to point out is the refunding of, or the refinancing of the bonds that we intend to refinance. That $1 million of savings does not go into the school district's budget. It is passed directly on to the property taxpayer. Mrs. Walsh, I need a roll call vote on this as well.
Mrs. Duroni?
Yes.
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Ms. Stufen?
Yes.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes. 7 ayes, no nays. That motion passes. Ms. Hennessy, which would you like to address next?
B, approval of resolution authorizing an escrow agreement in connection with the issuance of the general obligation refunding bonds. And this authorizes the district to set up an escrow with Bank of New York Mellon, where the proceeds of the refunding bonds will be invested to the call date and economically defease the refunded bonds.
Mrs. Hirsch, thank you.
I move that the Board of Education approve the resolution authorizing an escrow agreement in connection with the issue of general obligation refunding school bonds Series 2013A.
Second.
Moved by Mrs. Hirsch, seconded by Mrs. Duroni. The motion on the floor is the approval of the resolution authorizing an escrow agreement in connection with the issuance of general obligations refunding school bonds, Series 2013A. Any discussion? Hearing none, Mrs. Walsh, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Mrs. Duroni?
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen?
Yes.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner?
Yes.
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes. 7 ayes, no nays. That motion passes. Ms. Hennessy, item
Thank
number
you.
next?
I'm done.
You're all set?
Nice try.
Perfect.
She can't
Thank
do the
you.
levy.
Thank you very much. Sorry to keep you waiting so long, but you've learned a lot about our buildings and facilities. Next item on our agenda is upcoming meetings, and I can't tell you how relieved I am. I'm sorry.
You've got D&E.
Oh, I'm sorry. We do have D&E. I apologize at this late hour. Okay. Next is the approval of resolution for the 2012 Certificate of Levy. Mrs. Hirsch.
I move that the Board of Education approve the resolution for the 2012 Certificate of Levy.
Second?
Moved by Mrs. Hirsch, seconded by Mrs. Deroni. A motion to approve the resolution for the 2012 Certificate of Levy. Mrs. Walsh.
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Mrs. Droney?
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen?
Yes.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes, 7 ayes, no nays, that motion carries. And then finally, approval of a resolution to instruct the county clerk how to apportion the 2012 tax levy extension reductions. Mrs. Hirsch.
I move that the Board of Education approve the resolution to instruct the county clerk how to apportion the 2012 tax levy extension reductions.
Moved by Mrs. Hirsch, seconded by Mrs. Ebner. Any discussion? Mr. McDonough.
The language seems ambiguous. The decision about the best interest of the school district is in the delegation of authority to the superintendent. Is that right?
Chris?
Chris.
We have a question.
I'm sorry. The language in the resolution to instruct the county clerk how to apportion the 2012 tax levy discusses in the manner deemed in the best interest of the school district. That delegation to deem what's the best interest of the school district is a decision of the superintendent. Is that right? Not the county clerk. Just asking for an interpretation of the language. Section 1. It should be. Is that, do we know?
I don't know.
I think it's a long sentence, and I think
What happens is in March or April, they send me a final with the EAV and the tax rates, and I'm able to reallocate at that point, sign it, and send it back to the county in a different fashion than what we currently approved.
You're doing the reallocation, so it's superintendent. That's fine, thanks.
Okay. We're clear then that it's not the county clerk's decision, but yet it is the superintendent of Elmhurst District 205 decision. Okay. Any other discussion on that? Hearing none. Mrs. Walsh.
Ms. Hirsch?
yes.
Mrs. Ebner?
Yes.
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen?
Yes.
Mrs. Droney?
Yes.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes. 7 ayes, no nays. That motion carries. Now we're on to upcoming meetings. And I was going to say that I'm relieved to see that there are none in the next 2 weeks. However, January resumes a busy month. Tuesday, January 8th, in this room, is our General Board of Education meeting at 7:30 p.m. Very next day, Wednesday, January 9th, is the Performance Management Committee meeting at 7 p.m. in this room. Tuesday, January 15th, the Finance and Operations Committee meeting will meet at their special time of 6:30 in this room. Tuesday, January 22nd, the Board of Education general meeting again at 7:30 p.m. in this room. Tuesday, January 29th, the Committee of the Whole Board Improvement Policy meeting at 7 p.m. in this room, where we will discuss just making sure that we're on track for the goals that we set for ourselves during this fiscal year. Thursday, January 31st, Performance Management Committee will meet again at 7 p.m. in this room. The next item on the agenda is action on closed session items. Mr. McDonough?
I move that the Board of Education approve the administrative recommendation for the expulsion of York High School student C for the remainder of the 2012-2013 school year and the entire 2013-2014 school year effective December 19th, 2012.
Moved by Mr. McDonough on the expulsion at hand and seconded by Mrs. Hirsch. That requires a roll call vote. Mrs. Wall. Oh, I'm sorry, any discussion on this? Hearing none, requires a roll call vote. Mrs. Walsh, please.
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen?
Yes.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner?
Yes.
Mrs. Droney?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes. 7 ayes, no nays. That motion carries. The next is board communications. Is there anything? Mrs. Stufen.
I just have one point of clarification. When I said that we met with our first legislator and we toured 2 schools, it was York and Conrad Fisher. I think I may have said a different school.
You're right, you said Field.
Thank you.
Anything else? I have just one quick thing. Under the heading of Live and Learn, last June, as we reviewed all of the proposed board meeting dates for the year, Mr. Pernod had proposed 2 board meeting dates in November. We as a board decided to eliminate one of those 2, and that's why this agenda was 3 pages long. So next June, let's think about that as we consider board meeting dates. Is there anything else on the agenda? Since there are no other items on the agenda, I declare this meeting adjourned.